Hello, fellow sapiens. Whether you're winding down before bed or drifting through the day with headphones on, welcome. You've just found a quiet place to rest your mind. This is the First Footsteps channel. Slow and factual storytelling for the tired primate who still can't stop thinking about deep time, lost lands, and how we got here. So, wherever you are, in bed, in traffic, cooking, showering, or just working quietly, this is your invitation to slow down, to sink into the calm rhythm of real history. If you find yourself learning something or simply enjoying the way this story unfolds, consider tapping like and subscribing. That small action helps this kind of long-form science-based content reach more people who might need a different way to learn. The quiet way, the curious way. And if you're willing to share, drop a comment and tell us. Do you use this to fall asleep or focus while working? What time and place are you listening from? We'd love to know what kind of sapiens you are. Now, if you happen to drift off during one of the chapters, no worries. I've added timestamps in the description, so tomorrow you can pick up Italy where the story left off, because this one is worth finishing. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. Tonight, we journey back to a world where darkness was absolute, where every shadow held potential death, and where our ancestors learned to sleep beside creatures that could kill with a single strike. This is the story of how early humans survived sleeping outdoors with rattlesnakes, not through conquest or dominance, but through something far more profounding, understanding, adaptation, and the slow accumulation of wisdom that would echo through millennia. Close your eyes and imagine this. No electric lights cutting through the velvet darkness, no walls to separate you from the wild, no knowledge passed down through books or screens. Just you, your small band of family, the dying embers of a fire, and the endless night stretching out like a black ocean. Somewhere in that darkness, ancient as the earth itself, coiled and waiting, lived the serpent. The rattlesnake is older than your fear of it. These creatures have been perfecting the art of survival for over 25 million years. When our earliest ancestors first ventured down from the trees, when they first felt African soil beneath their feet and gazed up at unfamiliar stars, rattlesnakes were already masters of their domain. They had evolved their warning system, that distinctive rattle that would become the soundtrack to countless human nightmares, long before our species even existed. But here's what makes this story remarkable. Somehow, our ancestors learned not just to survive in rattlesnake country, but to sleep peacefully in it. Night after night, generation after generation, they discovered something that modern humans, with all our technology and medicine, have largely forgotten. They learned that survival wasn't about defeating the serpent. It was about understanding it so completely that coexistence became possible. The world our ancestors inhabited was a symphony of dangers we can barely imagine. Cave bears that could crush a human skull with a single swipe, saber-toothed cats that hunted in coordinated packs, dire wolves whose howls could freeze blood in your veins, and yet, it was often the smallest threat that proved most deadly. The silent, patient serpent that required no pack, no roar, no dramatic chase, just perfect timing and a single, decisive strike. In this world, knowledge wasn't stored in libraries or smartphones. It lived in the careful observations of grandmothers who had watched 10,000 sunsets, in the muscle memory of fathers who had learned to read the landscape like a book written in stone and shadow. Every piece of information was precious, earned through trial and error, sometimes paid for with blood. The first lesson our ancestors learned about rattlesnakes was perhaps the most important. These creatures were not evil, not malicious, not plotting human destruction around some serpentine council fire. They were simply another form of life, following patterns as predictable as the turning of seasons, as reliable as the movement of stars across the night sky. The rattlesnake was a creature of habit, and habits could be understood, predicted, and worked around. This understanding came slowly, purchased with the lives of the unlucky and the careless. A child who wandered too close to sun-warmed rocks during the day, an adult who stumbled in darkness toward what they thought was an empty clearing, a hunter who reached into a crevice without looking first. Each tragedy became a lesson, each lesson became knowledge, and each piece of knowledge became part of humanity's growing library of survival. But beyond the practical learning lay something deeper, something almost mystical in its implications. Our ancestors began to develop what we might call serpent sense, an intuitive understanding of snake behavior that went beyond mere observation. They could feel when snake country was near, could sense the subtle changes in landscape and vegetation that indicated serpent territory. They developed an almost supernatural ability to avoid snakes without even consciously looking for them. This wasn't magic, though it might have seemed like it to an outside observer. It was the result of thousands of years of coevolution, of human consciousness adapting to include serpent awareness as a background process, like breathing or heartbeat. Our ancestors' brains literally rewired them to process snake-related information more efficiently, more quickly, more unconsciously. The development of this serpent sense was crucial because rattlesnakes occupied the same ecological niches that early humans found most attractive. Both species preferred areas with reliable water sources, natural shelter, and abundant prey. Both sought out south-facing slopes that caught the warming rays of the sun. Both valued the protection offered by rock overhangs and shallow caves. In essence, wherever early humans wanted to make camp, rattlesnakes had often been there first. This created what scientists now call competitive coexistence, two species utilizing the same resources without direct conflict. But achieving this balance required something remarkable from our ancestors. They had to learn to think like snakes while remaining fundamentally human. They had to understand serpent logic while maintaining their own survival priorities. The rattlesnake's world operates on principles that seem almost alien to modern human experience. Temperature governs everything. A snake that is too cold cannot digest food, cannot move quickly enough to hunt or escape, cannot even maintain the basic cellular processes necessary for life. Too hot, and the snake risks death from overheating, its proteins literally cooking within its body. This narrow temperature window creates predictable patterns of behavior that early humans learned to read like a natural calendar. Spring emergence was the most dangerous time. Snakes that had spent months in underground dens, their metabolisms slowed to barely sustainable levels, would emerge ravenous and irritable. Their strike reflexes were sluggish, but their desperation was high. These were snakes that had been pushed to the very edge of survival, and desperate creatures are always the most dangerous. Early humans learned to read the signs of spring emergence the first warm days after a long cold spell. When snow had melted but ground temperatures remained low in the early morning hours. They watched for the telltale tracks in mud and sand, the distinctive sidewinding pattern of a snake that had ventured out to hunt but returned to its den before full daylight. They learned to avoid certain areas during these transition periods, understanding that a hungry snake was an unpredictable snake. Summer brought different challenges. Now the snakes were active hunters, their metabolisms running at full efficiency. But summer heat also drove them to seek shelter during the hottest parts of the day, clustering in shaded areas that early humans also found attractive for camping. Our ancestors learned to identify these heat refuges, the north sides of large boulders, the deep shadows cast by cliff faces, the cool spaces beneath fallen logs or dense brush. The summer snake was a creature of routine. Early morning and late evening hunting periods, midday rest in reliable shade, nighttime returns to temperature-stable dens. This predictability became a tool our ancestors could use to their advantage. They learned to time their activities around snake schedules, to move through snake territory during the hours when encounters were least likely, to set up camps that wouldn't interfere with established serpent highways. Fall brought its own dynamics. Snakes preparing for winter dormancy would seek out the deepest, most temperature-stable dens available. These were often the same caves and rock shelters that early humans preferred for their own winter camps. This created a period of increased tension when two species with similar survival needs were forced into competition for the same limited resources. But here's where the story becomes truly remarkably Instead of attempting to drive out the snakes through violence or destruction, our ancestors often found ways to share these spaces. They learned to identify which areas of a cave system snakes preferred, usually the deepest, most thermally stable sections, and which areas remained snake-free. They developed techniques for cohabitation that allowed both species to survive the harsh winter months. This coexistence required a level of ecological sophistication that we're only now beginning to appreciate fully. Early humans had to understand not just snake behavior, but the entire web of relationships that connected snakes to their environment. They had to know which plants snakes avoided, which geological formations provided snake dens, which weather patterns influenced snake activity. They had to think systematically about the landscape, seeing it not just as a collection of resources, but as an integrated ecosystem where every element affected every other element. Hunger. The development of this ecological thinking was perhaps one of the most important cognitive advances in human evolution. It required our ancestors to hold multiple variables in their minds simultaneously, to think in terms of probabilities and patterns rather than simple cause and effect. It demanded a level of abstract reasoning that would later be crucial for everything from agriculture to astronomy. But this knowledge came with a cost. Living in constant awareness of serpent presence created a particular kind of psychological pressure. Our ancestors had to maintain what psychologists might now call hypervigilance, a state of heightened alertness that allowed them to detect and respond to snake threats instantly. This vigilance became so deeply embedded in human consciousness that traces of it remain with us today, millions of years later. Watch a modern human encounter a snake, even a harmless one, even in a zoo behind thick glass. Notice the immediate physical responsing, the sharp intake of breath, the sudden muscle tension, the involuntary step backward. This isn't learned behavior, it's genetic memory, the echo of countless generations who survived because they could recognize and respond to serpent presence in fractions of a second. Our ancestors lived with this awareness every moment of every day. They developed it into an art form, a survival skill so refined that it appeared almost supernatural to outside observers. They could sense snake presence through vibrations in the ground, through subtle changes in air currents, through the behavior of other animals that shared their environment. And they became so attuned to serpent signals that they could often avoid encounters entirely, passing through snake country like ghosts, leaving both species undisturbed. This chapter of human evolution, the long, slow dance between human and serpent, shaped us in ways we're still discovering. It influenced our neural development, our sensory processing, our social structures, even our art and storytelling traditions. The serpent became embedded in human consciousness, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a teacher whose lessons were written in the language of survival itself. As night settles around you now, as you listen to this story in whatever safe space you've created for yourself, remember that you carry within your DNA the accumulated wisdom of ancestors who learned to sleep peacefully beside creatures that could kill them with a thought. Their knowledge flows in your blood, their awareness flickers in your peripheral vision, their hard-won understanding of the serpent's world remains part of what makes you human. The ground beneath your feet is speaking. It has always been speaking. Your ancestors knew how to listen. In the soft hours before dawn, when the world exists in that liminal space between night and day, an early human would kneel and place their palm flat against the earth. The soil held stories, which creatures had passed this way when they had travelled, where they were going. But reading these stories required a literacy we have almost entirely lost. A rattlesnake leaves subtle signatures in its passing, not just the obvious tracks, the sinuous line pressed into sand or mud, but subtler signs that spoke to those who knew the language. The way certain plants bent differently when a heavy-bodied snake moved through them versus the passage of smaller creatures. The particular of disturbed pebbles that indicated a snake's belly dragging across loose stone, the almost imperceptible depression in soft earth where a serpent had coiled for warmth during the cool night hours. Our ancestors became fluent in this earthen alphabet through necessity and survival. A misread sign could mean choosing a campsite directly atop a snake's regular hunting route. An unnoticed signal could result in a fatal encounter during the vulnerable hours of sleep. So they learned to read the ground with the same intensity that a scholar might study ancient manuscripts, understanding that every mark, every disturbance, every trace contained potentially life-saving information. The skill developed differently in different individuals, but it followed predictable patterns. Children showed the earliest aptitude, their developing brains more plastic and adaptable to this kind of pattern recognition. They would spend hours studying inks and traces, playing games that were actually sophisticated training exercises. I find the snake sign was more than entertainment, it was education in the most literal life or death sense. Young hunters learned to read not just individual signs, but the larger patterns they formed across the landscape. Snakes didn't move randomly through their territory. They followed established routes between den sites, hunting grounds, and water sources. These serpent highways were as predictable as modern roads, and learning to identify them was crucial for safe travel through snake country. A skilled tracker could lay hillside and immediately identify the most likely snake routes without seeing a single track. South-facing slopes with scattered rocks for basking sites. Natural corridors between different elevations that allowed snakes to follow optimal temperature gradients throughout the day. Ridgelines that provided efficient travel routes while offering multiple escape options into brush or crevices. The ability to read these landscape patterns represented a form of intelligence that modern humans rarely develop. It required holding multiple layers of information simultaneously: topography, vegetation, weather patterns, seasonal changes, animal behavior, and countless subtle environmental cues that influenced where snakes were likely to be found at any given time. This knowledge was never abstract or theoretical. It was tested daily against reality, refined through constant application, validated by survival itself. A tracking mistake meant nothing more than losing a trail, but a snake reading error could mean death. This created a feedback loop that drove ever greater precision and accuracy in observation skills. The development of this expertise was both individual and collective. Personal experience and natural aptitude mattered, but equally important was the accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. Elders who had survived 40, 50, even 60 years in snake country had observed patterns and correlations that no single lifetime could fully encompass. Their knowledge was precious beyond measure, and its transmission was one of the most important educational processes in early human societies. Teaching snake reading wasn't done through lectures or demonstrations. It happened through immersions, through constant exposure to the signs and their meanings. A grandmother would walk with her grandchildren, stopping at each significant mark or trace, explaining not just what it indicated, but why it mattered, how it connected to other signs, what action should follow from this observation. "See how the grass bends here," she might say, kneeling beside a seemingly unremarkable patch of vegetation. "Notice that it bends in one direction, not scattered like wind would cause. This tells us something heavy moved through, pushing against the stems. But look at the pattern. Smooth, continuous, no individual footprints. This is serpent sign." The child would learn to see not just the bent grass, but everything that made this observation meaningful. The time of day that created the best light for seeing such subtle disturbances. The season when grass held these impressions longest. The weather conditions that made tracking easier or harder. The surrounding landscape features that made this particular location likely or unlikely for snake activity. Layer by layer, observation by observation, a complete understanding was built. The child learned to read not just individual signs, but entire stories written across the landscape. Here a snake had emerged from its den in the pre-dawn darkness. There it had paused to taste the air, its forked tongue gathering chemical information about potential prey in the area. Here it had changed direction, perhaps detecting the scent of a mouse or rabbit. There it had settled into ambush position, coiled and motionless beneath a game trail. These stories weren't just academic exercises. They provided crucial information for anyone traveling through or camping in the area. Knowing that a snake regularly hunted along a particular route meant choosing different paths or timing movements to avoid encounters. Understanding the location of active dens meant positioning camps at safe distances and approach angles. But the most sophisticated practitioners of this earth reading skill developed something that went beyond simple track interpretation. They learned to sense the presence of snakes through much more subtle environmental cues. Changes in the behavior of birds and small mammals, variations in insect activity, even alterations in the feel of air currents that might indicate a large predator's presence nearby. This heightened environmental awareness created what modern researchers might call an early warning system. Experienced snake country travelers could often detect serpent presence before any direct visual contact occurred. They could sense when they were entering active snake habitat, when conditions were right for encounters, when the invisible boundaries of serpent territory were crossed. The development of this sensitivity wasn't mystical, and though it might have appeared so to less experienced observers, it was based on the recognition of extremely subtle patterns and correlations that existed below the threshold of conscious awareness. The slight change in bird calls that occurred when a predator was present, the way certain insects modified their activity patterns in response to snake pheromones, the almost imperceptible shift in air movement that indicated a large, motionless creature nearby. These cues were so subtle that detecting them required a kind of consciousness that we might call meditation in motion. A state of relaxed but intense awareness where the mind processed vast amounts of environmental information without conscious analysis. The practitioner learned to trust intuitive responses to patterns that couldn't be logically explained, but had proved reliable through years of experience. This intuitive awareness was particularly important during the vulnerable hours of sleep. A truly skilled snake reader could maintain environmental monitoring even while unconscious, their dreaming mind alert to changes in the sensory environment that might indicate approaching danger. They could wake instantly from deep sleep if something was wrong, yet remain relaxed enough to get genuine rest when conditions were safe. The training required to develop these abilities was subtle and long-term. It couldn't be rushed or forced, but had to develop naturally through constant exposure and gradual refinement of sensitivity. A person might spend years learning to consciously identify obvious snake signs, then years more developing the unconscious pattern recognition that allowed detection of more subtle indicators. Different individuals showed different aptitudes for various aspects of this skill set. Some excelled at visual tracking, able to follow faint trails across rock and through dense vegetation. Others developed exceptional sensitivity to vibrations, able to detect the movement of snakes through ground contact even when the creatures were invisible and silent. Still others became masters of reading environmental secondary effects, the ways that snake presence influenced the behavior of other species in the ecosystem. The most accomplished practitioners combined all these abilities into a comprehensive understanding of snake presence and movement that approached the supernatural in its accuracy. They could enter an area and immediately assess the likelihood of encounters, identify the safest routes and camping spots, predict optimal times for various activities, and guide their groups through snake country with remarkable success rates. This expertise was never perfect or foolproof. Even the most skilled snake readers occasionally made mistakes or encountered situations that exceeded their abilities. But the development of these earth-reading skills reduced the risks of snake encounters dramatically, allowing early human populations to habit and thrive in regions that would otherwise have been too dangerous for long-term settlement. The loss of these abilities in modern human populations represents one of the most significant disconnections from our ancestral survival knowledge. We have gained much through technological advancement, but we have also lost forms of environmental awareness and ecological intelligence that took millennia to develop. The ground is still speaking. The signs are still there, but we have largely forgotten how to listen. As you settle deeper into this story, consider the earth beneath your own feet. Whether you're lying in bed, sitting in a chair, walking down a street, remember that countless generations of your ancestors learned to read stories written in soil and stone. Their observations, their knowledge, their hard-won understanding of the serpent's world, all of it flows forward through time to rest in your cells, your DNA, your capacity to learn and adapt and survive. The language of Earth is still being spoken. The question is whether we remember how to hear it. In the deep hours of night, when consciousness dissolves into the borderlands of dream, our ancestors faced a paradox that would define human survival for millennia: how to surrender to the vulnerability of sleep while remaining protected from creatures that hunted in darkness. The solution they developed was nothing less than a reimagining of what it meant to rest in a world full of predators. Sleep is the great equalizer. In those hours of unconsciousness, the most skilled hunter becomes as defenseless as a newborn. The most alert tracker loses all environmental awareness. The most experienced snake reader becomes temporarily blind to the very signs that could save their life. Our ancestors understood this vulnerability intimately, and they developed what we might call an architecture of safe sleep, a comprehensive system for creating protective spaces that functioned even when human consciousness was offline. This architecture began with the most fundamental principling: the ground itself was both ally and enemy, sanctuary and threat, foundation and vulnerability all at once. Every patch of earth that might serve as a sleeping site had to be read like a complex text. Its story understood completely before any human could safely surrender to sleep there. The site selection process was methodical, almost ritualistic in its precision. It began during the day, often hours before the intended sleep time, with a careful survey of potential locations. But this wasn't simply a matter of finding flat, comfortable ground. The evaluation involved dozens of interconnected factors, each crucial to nighttime safety, each requiring specialized knowledge to assess correctly. Water sources created the first layer of complexity. All life needed water, which meant that areas near streams, springs, and seasonal pools attracted not just early humans, but every other creature in the region. Snakes came to drink, but more importantly, they came to hunt the other animals that came to drink. A campsite positioned too close to water might offer convenience during the day, but could become a predator highway after dark. The optimal distance varied with seasons, weather patterns, and local topography. During dry periods, when water sources were scarce and widely scattered, camping closer to water might be worth the increased risk. During wet seasons, when options were abundant, greater distances could be maintained safely. But the decision was never casual. It always involved weighing multiple factors against the fundamental requirement of nighttime security. Elevation changes added another layer of calculation. Snakes generally preferred to travel along consistent elevation contours, following natural paths that didn't require unnecessary energy expenditure for uphill or downhill movement. Ridgelines, valley floors, and the transition zones between different elevation levels all served as natural snake highways. Sleeping sites had to be positioned to avoid these travel routes while still maintaining access to necessary resources. The relationship between elevation and temperature created additional considerations. Cold air settled in low areas while warm air rose to higher elevations. Since snake activity was so closely tied to temperature, understanding these thermal patterns was crucial for predicting where encounters were most likely to occur at different times of night. A site that was snake-free during the warm evening hours might become dangerous as temperatures dropped and serpents sought warmer microclimates. Vegetation patterns provided another crucial layer of information. Different plant communities created different habitat types that attracted or repelled various species. Dense brush offered hiding places for small prey animals, which in turn attracted hunting snakes. Open grasslands provided different opportunities and risks. Rocky areas with scattered vegetation created complex microclimates that might harbor snakes during some conditions but not others. The most skilled site evaluators could look at a landscape and immediately identify what researchers now call thermal refuges, specific microclimates that would remain attractive to cold-blooded creatures throughout the night. These might include south-facing rock faces that retained heat from daytime solar warming, areas of dense vegetation that provided insulation from temperature fluctuations, or geological features that channeled warmer air from underground sources. Once a potential site was identified, the detailed evaluation process began. This involved a systematic examination of the immediate area that was far more thorough than most modern humans would consider necessary. Every rock had to be moved or checked. Every patch of vegetation had to be disturbed and examined. Every crevice or depression had to be investigated for signs of current or recent serpent presence. This examination wasn't paranoid over precaution. It was based on the understanding that snakes often occupied spaces that appeared empty to casual observation. A rocky depression that looked like convenient natural furniture might actually be a snake's preferred resting spot of hunger. A fallen log that seemed perfect for sitting or sleeping against might shelter a serpent in the space beneath. A patch of soft sand that appeared ideal for comfortable sleeping might show subtle signs of recent snake activity that only trained eyes could detect. The clearing process that followed site selection was equally systematic and thorough. Everything had to be removed from the sleeping area. Not just obviously dangerous items like sharp rocks or thorny vegetation, but anything that might provide hiding places for creatures that preferred to avoid human contact until the last possible moment. Leaves, small stones, patches of grass, fallen branches, even slight depressions in the soil that might collect water or provide shelter. All of it had to go. This clearing created what modern researchers might recognize as a defensive perimeter around the sleeping area. The bare ground provided visual confirmation that no dangerous creatures were present, but equally important, it eliminated hiding places where snakes might conceal themselves during the day and remain undetected until nighttime activity began. The cleared area extended well beyond the actual sleeping space, creating a buffer zone that served multiple functions. It provided early warning if any creatures approached during the night, since movement across the cleared ground would be visible even in dim light. It eliminated nearby hiding places that might house snakes waiting for opportunities to hunt small prey attracted to human campsites. And it created space for defensive responses if encounters did occur. But clearing the ground was only the beginning of the site preparation process. The next phase involved what we might call environmental modification, changes to the immediate surroundings that would make snake encounters less likely without eliminating the viability of the site for human occupation. The creation of physical barriers was one of the most important modifications. These weren't walls or fences in the modern sense, but subtle alterations to the landscape that would encourage snakes to travel around rather than through the sleeping area. A line of carefully positioned rocks might create a texture that snakes found uncomfortable to cross. A shallow trench filled with rough sand might provide similar deterrent effects while remaining virtually invisible to human occupants. The placement of these barriers required understanding snake psychology and physiology. Rattlesnakes, like most serpents, are preferred to travel along paths that offered the least resistance and the most security. They avoided crossing open spaces where they would be vulnerable to aerial predators. They preferred surfaces that provided good traction for their method of locomotion. They sought routes that offered multiple escape options in case of danger. By understanding these preferences, early humans could create sleeping sites that snakes would naturally avoid without the need for active deterrence or confrontation. The goal wasn't to trap or harm serpents, but simply to encourage them to choose alternative routes that didn't involve crossing through human sleeping areas. Fire played a crucial role in this architecture of safe sleep, but not in the simple way that most people imagine. The relationship between fire and snake deterrence was complex and nuanced, requiring careful management to achieve the desired effects without creating new dangers or problems. Heat was one component of fire's protective function. Most snakes avoided areas of intense heat that might damage their sensitive skin or disrupt their careful thermoregulation. A fire that was too large or too hot, however, might drive snakes away completely during the evening hours, only to attract them later in the night as the flames died down and the remaining coals provided gentler warmth. The optimal fire management involved maintaining consistent, moderate heat throughout the night, enough to create a thermal environment that snakes would find uncomfortable, but not so much as to exhaust fuel supplies or create fire safety hazards. This required understanding the burning characteristics of different wood types, the effects of fire size on heat distribution, and the timing of fuel additions to maintain steady temperatures. Light was another important aspect of fire's protective function. Most snakes were adapted for hunting in low-light conditions and preferred to avoid areas of bright illumination, where they would be visible to potential predators or prey. But here, too, the relationship was more complex than it might initially appear. Too much light could attract insects and small animals, which in turn might attract hunting snakes despite their general preference for darkness. The optimal lighting involved creating enough illumination to allow human eyes to adjust and function effectively during brief nighttime awakenings, while avoiding the intense brightness that might disrupt the natural behavior patterns of nocturnal creatures in the surrounding area. This typically meant maintaining small, controlled fires rather than large blazes. Smoke production added another layer to fire's protective effects. Many plant materials, when burned, produced smoke that contained chemical compounds that snakes found irritating or unpleasant. This wasn't accidental. Early humans experimented with different burning materials and learned to identify which ones produced the most effective deterrent effects. The selection of burning materials became a specialized knowledge area. Certain woods produced smoke that was particularly effective at masking human scent from snake detection systems. Others generated chemical compounds that irritated snake respiratory or sensory systems. Still others created lasting effects that continued to provide protection even after the fire had died down to coals. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of fire management was its integration with other protective measures. Fire wasn't used in isolation, but as part of a comprehensive system that included site selection, ground preparation, physical barriers, and behavioral modifications. The fire's placement relative to sleeping areas, prevailing wind patterns, available fuel supplies, and potential escape routes all had to be considered in the overall architecture of safe sleep. The sleeping arrangements themselves were the final component of this protective system. Even with careful site preparation and fire management, the way humans positioned their bodies during sleep could make the difference between safety and fatal encounter. These arrangements weren't accidental or arbitrary. They were the result of countless generations of experimentation and refinement. Group sleeping patterns served multiple protective functions. Bodies, positioned in specific configurations, could create additional barriers that snakes would be reluctant to cross. Sleeping distances between individuals could be optimized to provide mutual protection while avoiding the concentration of human scent that might attract curious predators. Wake schedules could be staggered so that some level of consciousness was always maintained within the group. Individual sleeping positions also mattered. The way arms and legs were arranged could minimize the body profile that a snake might encounter while hunting. Head positions could optimize the ability to detect approaching threats through sound or vibration. Body orientation could ensure that any sudden awakening would position the sleeper for optimal escape or defensive responses. The development of these sleeping architectures represented one of the most important advances in early human survival technology. It allowed our ancestors to occupy and thrive in environments that would otherwise have been too dangerous for long-term habitation. It provided the security necessary for the deep, restorative sleep that complex nervous systems require. And it created the foundation for the settled lifestyle that would eventually lead to agriculture, civilization, and all the developments that followed. This architecture wasn't built once and then forgotten. It had to be reconstructed every night, adapted to local conditions, modified based on seasonal changes and environmental variations. It required constant vigilance and maintenance. It demanded expertise that took years to develop and lifetime to master. But it worked, night after night, season after season, generation after generation. Our ancestors slept peacefully in lands where serpents hunted in darkness. They created safety through understanding, security through knowledge, a protection through harmony with the natural world rather than dominance over it. As you drift toward your own sleep, in whatever protected space you have created, remember that the architecture of safe rest has ancient roots. The peace you feel in your secure environment echoes the peace that our ancestors earned through careful observation, patient learning, and the gradual accumulation of wisdom about how to rest safely in a dangerous world. Their knowledge flows forward through time to reach you here, in this moment, in this quiet space where you can surrender to sleep without fear, knowing that the architecture of safety that surrounds you was built by countless generations who learned, night by night, how to rest in the presence of serpents. In the liminal hours between day and night, when the last light fades from the western sky and stars begin their ancient dance across darkness, our ancestors discovered something remarkable. The air itself could become an ally in the ancient negotiation between human and serpent. They learned that certain plants, when burned or crushed or scattered, could speak to snakes in a chemical language older than words, older than consciousness, older than the first human thought. This discovery emerged slowly through countless generations of careful observation and patient experimentation. Someone noticed that snakes seemed to avoid certain areas where specific plants grew wild. Someone else observed that a fire built with particular wood types seemed to keep serpents at a distance more effectively than ordinary flames. A grandmother gathering herbs for medicine noticed that her collection bag never contained unexpected snake passengers when filled with certain aromatic plants. These individual observations accumulated over time, passed down through oral tradition, tested and refined through practical application. Gradually, early humans began to understand that they could influence snake behavior without direct confrontation, without violence, without the risks that came with physical encounters. They could create environments that snakes would naturally avoid, spaces of chemical sanctuary where human sleep could proceed undisturbed. The foundation of this understanding lay in recognizing how fundamentally different snake sensory systems were from human perception. We experience the world primarily through sight and sound, with smell and taste playing secondary roles in most situations. Snakes inhabit a reality dominated by chemical information, a universe of molecular messages that humans can barely imagine. A rattlesnake's forked tongue is constantly sampling the air, collecting microscopic particles and transferring them to a specialized organ called the Jacobson's organ or vomeronasal organ. This system allows snakes to taste their environment with extraordinary precision and sensitivity. They can detect the chemical signature of prey animals from remarkable distances, follow scent trails that are hours or even days old, and distinguish between different species, individuals, and even emotional states based purely on molecular information. This chemical awareness is so acute that snakes can navigate their world almost entirely through scent, using visual information only to supplement and confirm what their chemical senses have already revealed. They can identify safe paths, locate prey, avoid predators, find mates, and select appropriate shelter sites, all based on the invisible cloud of molecular information that surrounds every living thing. Understanding this chemical reality allowed our ancestors to develop what we might call scent-based defense systems. Instead of trying to fight or flee from snakes, they learned to manipulate the chemical environment in ways that would make their presence either undetectable or actively repellent to serpent sensory systems. The first and most basic technique involved scent masking, using strong-smelling substances to overwhelm or confuse snake chemical detection abilities. When the air was filled with powerful plant aromatics, snake tongue sampling would collect so many conflicting molecular messages that sorting out specific information became difficult or impossible. It was like trying to have a conversation in a crowded, noisy room where multiple conversations were happening simultaneously at high volume. The selection of masking plants required extensive knowledge of local flora and their chemical properties. Different plants produce different types of aromatic compounds, some sharp and penetrating, others heavy and cloying, still others with complex mixtures that changed character as they burned or dried. The most effective masking required combining multiple plant types to create chemical confusion that would persist throughout the night hours when snake activity peaked. Sage became one of the most important plants in this arsenal of chemical defense. When burned, sage produced a heavy, persistent smoke that contained dozens of volatile compounds. These molecules had evolved as the plant's own defense system against herbivorous insects and browsing animals, but they proved equally effective at overwhelming snake sensory systems. A sage fire created a chemical cloud that could mask human scent for considerable distances, making it nearly impossible for hunting snakes to detect or track human presence in the area. Cedar offered different protective properties. Its smoke contained compounds that not only masked scent but actively irritated snake respiratory systems. Unlike mammals, snakes had relatively simple lung structures that were sensitive to certain chemical irritants. Cedar smoke created an environment that snakes found physically uncomfortable, encouraging them to seek alternative routes that avoided the affected area entirely. Sweet grass provided yet another layer of protection. This plant produced aromatic compounds that interfered specifically with snake pheromone detection. Since snakes relied heavily on pheromone trails to navigate their territory and locate prey, and disrupting this chemical communication system effectively made the area navigational dead zone from a serpent perspective. Snakes entering sweet grass smoke zones often became confused and disoriented, abandoning their hunting or travel activities to retreat to more familiar territory. But the most sophisticated practitioners of plant-based snake deterrence went beyond simple masking to develop what we might call chemical repulsion. Using plants that produced compounds that snakes found actively unpleasant or even painful to encounter. These weren't necessarily toxic substances, but rather molecules that triggered avoidance responses in snake nervous systems. Certain members of the mint family produced oils that caused skin irritation in snakes when contact occurred. The plants had evolved these compounds as protection against browsing animals. But early humans discovered that crushing these plants and scattering the resulting oils around sleeping areas created barriers that snakes were reluctant to cross. The oils didn't cause permanent harm, but they created enough discomfort that snakes would typically choose alternative routes rather than push through treated areas. Other plants contained compounds that interfered with snake thermoregulation. Since maintaining proper body temperature was crucial for snake survival, anything that disrupted their thermal balance posed a serious threat. Certain aromatic herbs produced vapors that confused snake temperature sensors, making it difficult for them to assess environmental conditions accurately. In areas where these vapors were concentrated, snakes often exhibited disoriented behavior and would retreat to areas where their thermal perception functioned normally. The application of these plant-based deterrents required understanding not just which plants worked, but how to use them most effectively. Timing was crucial. Deterrent plants had to be applied or burned at the right moments to achieve maximum protective effect. Weather conditions influenced how scents dispersed and how long they remained effective. Wind patterns could carry protective vapors away from sleeping areas or concentrate them in unexpected locations. The preparation of plant materials also mattered enormously. Fresh plants produced different chemical profiles than dried ones. A burning released some compounds while destroying others. Crushing or grinding could activate certain chemical reactions while leaving others dormant. The most effective practitioners developed sophisticated processing techniques that maximized the deterrent properties of each plant species. Some plant materials were most effective when burned slowly as smoldering embers rather than bright flames. This produced steady, long-lasting chemical releases that provided protection throughout the night. Other plants worked best when crushed fresh and scattered around the perimeter of sleeping areas, hunger, where they would release their protective compounds gradually as dew formed and evaporated during the night hours. The combination of different plants often produced synergistic effects where the total deterrent impact was greater than the sum of individual plant contributions. Certain plant combinations created chemical interactions that produced entirely new compounds with enhanced protective properties. Other combinations provided layered defense systems where different compounds targeted different aspects of snake sensory or nervous system function. These chemical combinations had to be developed through careful experimentation over multiple generations. A combination that worked well in one geographic region might prove ineffective in areas with different snake species or subspecies. Local plant availability varied with climate, soil conditions, and seasonal patterns. What worked during dry seasons might fail during wet periods when plant chemistry and scent dispersal patterns changed dramatically. The storage and preservation of effective plant materials presented additional challenges. Many of the most useful plants were only available during specific seasons or under particular growing conditions. Learning to harvest, process, and store these materials so that they retained their protective properties became a specialized skill that required understanding plant biochemistry at an intuitive level. Some plant materials could be dried and stored for extended periods without losing effectiveness. Others had to be used fresh or would lose their active compounds within days of harvesting. Still others actually became more potent after certain processing or aging procedures that concentrated their chemical constituents or triggered reactions that produced more effective deterrent compounds. The most skilled practitioners of plant-based snake deterrents developed what amounted to portable apothecaries. Carefully curated collections of processed plant materials that could provide chemical protection in any environment. These collections represented years of gathering, processing, and testing different materials to identify the most reliable and effective combinations for various situations. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this plant-based protection system was its integration with other survival technologies. Chemical deterrence wasn't used in isolation, but as part of comprehensive defense strategies that included site selection, ground preparation, fire management, and behavioral modifications. The plants worked synergistically with fire to create more effective smoke patterns. They complemented careful site selection by providing additional protection in areas where complete snake avoidance wasn't possible. They enhanced the effectiveness of physical barriers by making them more chemically uncomfortable for snakes to approach or cross. This integration required understanding not just individual plant properties, but how different plants interacted with each other and with other elements of the protection system. A plant that worked well when burned in isolation might prove ineffective when combined with certain types of wood in the fire. Another plant might enhance the deterrent effects of fire when used properly, but could actually attract snakes if applied incorrectly. The development of these integrated systems represented a form of ecological engineering that was both sophisticated and sustainable. Early humans learned to work with natural chemical processes rather than against them, using plants' own evolutionary adaptations to create protection without depleting resources or damaging the environment that sustained both human and snake populations. Weather patterns influenced the effectiveness of chemical deterrents in complex ways. High humidity could enhance the dispersal of some aromatic compounds while reducing the effectiveness of others. Wind could carry protective vapors away from sleeping areas, but could also spread them more widely for area protection. Rain could wash away surface applications, but might also activate certain plant compounds or create conditions that enhanced their persistence. Learning to predict and adapt to these weather effects was crucial for reliable protection. Experienced practitioners could assess atmospheric conditions and adjust their plant applications accordingly, using more material during conditions that would reduce effectiveness or timing applications to take advantage of optimal dispersal conditions. The seasonal availability of different plant materials created additional planning requirements. Summer offered abundant fresh materials, but also peak snake activity when protection was most needed. Fall provided opportunities to gather and process materials for winter storage, and hunger, though preservation techniques had to ensure that dried plants retained their effectiveness. Spring emergence periods often coincided with times when stored plant materials were running low and fresh alternatives weren't yet available. This seasonal planning required understanding not just when different plants were available, but when their chemical constituents were at peak concentrations for deterrent purposes. Many plants produced their strongest protective compounds during specific growth phases or in response to particular environmental stresses. Timing the harvest to capture maximum potency was crucial for creating effective deterrent materials. The knowledge required to master plant-based snake deterrents was vast and complex, encompassing botany, chemistry, meteorology, and animal behavior. It took years to develop reliable expertise and decades to achieve true mastery. This knowledge was precious beyond measure, representing the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who had learned through trial and error, through careful observation, and sometimes through fatal mistakes. The practitioners of this chemical art became valued members of their communities. Their expertise sought whenever groups traveled through snake country or established camps in areas where serpent encounters were likely. Their knowledge meant the difference between peaceful sleep and sleepless nights spent in fear and vigilance. As the last embers of evening fade into full darkness, as you settle deeper into this story of ancient wisdom and chemical sanctuary, remember that the air around you still carries traces of that primordial conversation between plant and serpent, between human understanding and chemical protection. The molecules that once provided sanctuary for our ancestors still drift through the night air, still speak their ancient language of deterrence and safety. Their invisible presence reminds us that protection doesn't always come through strength or violence, but sometimes through understanding the subtle chemical conversations that have been taking place in the natural world since long before humans walked the earth. Our ancestors learned to join that conversation, to add their own chemical words to the ancient dialogue between life and danger, safety and threat. In learning this language, they found a form of protection that was both powerful and peaceful, effective yet harmonious with the natural world they inhabited. They discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come not through conquest but through understanding, not through domination but through participation in systems that are larger and older and wiser than human ambition alone. There is a kind of sleep that belongs only to the wild, a state of rest that maintains a thread of connection to the waking world, ready to snap into full consciousness at the first whisper of danger. Our ancestors mastered this vigilant sleep, learning to surrender to unconsciousness while keeping one foot planted firmly in the realm of awareness, always ready to step back across the threshold between dreams and survival. This wasn't the deep, oblivious sleep that we know today, cushioned by walls and locks and the assumption of safety. This was something more complex, more nuanced. A carefully calibrated state that provided the restoration that sleep must offer while maintaining the alertness that life demanded. It was sleep with ears open, sleep with muscles ready, sleep that could transform into action in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The development of vigilant sleep was perhaps one of the most remarkable neurological adaptations in human evolution. It required training the brain to function on multiple levels simultaneously, allowing the conscious mind to rest while keeping deeper survival systems alert and responsive. This wasn't a skill that could be learned quickly or easily. It took years of practice to develop and a lifetime of maintenance to sustain, and children began learning the basics of alert rest almost as soon as they could understand language. They were taught to wake to certain sounds while remaining asleep through others, to distinguish between the normal night sounds of their environment and the subtle audio signatures that might indicate danger. This early training shaped their developing nervous systems, creating neural pathways that would serve them throughout their lives in dangerous environments. The process began with games and exercises that seemed like play, but were actually sophisticated neurological training. Children learned to identify different types of sounds while their eyes were closed, to respond to gentle touches without startling, to wake quickly but quietly without the confusion and disorientation that typically accompanies sudden awakening. These skills were developed gradually through repeated practice that embedded the responses deep in unconscious muscle memory. Adults who had mastered vigilant sleep displayed what seemed like supernatural abilities to outside observers. They could detect approaching footsteps long before they became audible to normal hearing. They could sense changes in air pressure or temperature that might indicate the presence of large animals nearby. They could wake instantly from deep sleep if something in their environment changed, yet remain completely relaxed when conditions were safe. The neurological basis for these abilities involved training different parts of the brain to operate independently. The conscious mind could rest while deeper brain structures, those responsible for survival reflexes and threat detection, remained active and alert. This created a layered consciousness where different levels of awareness operated simultaneously without interfering with each other. Sound discrimination was perhaps the most crucial component of vigilant sleep. The night environment was never silent, but filled with a complex symphony of natural sounds. Wind through vegetation, the calls of nocturnal animals, the settling and cooling of rocks and soil, the movement of water over stone. Learning to sleep peacefully within this soundscape, while remaining alert to sounds that didn't belong, required developing extraordinary auditory processing abilities. The human ear, when properly trained, and could distinguish between the rustle of wind moving through dry grass and the sound of a snake's body pushing through the same vegetation. The two sounds were subtly different. Wind created irregular, intermittent patterns, while snake movement produced more consistent, directional disturbances. Learning to recognize these differences unconsciously, even during sleep, could mean the difference between peaceful rest and fatal encounter. Different types of footsteps created different acoustic signatures that experienced listeners could identify even while unconscious. The quick, light steps of small prey animals had distinct rhythms and intensities. The heavier, more deliberate movement of large predators created different sound patterns. Human footsteps had their own characteristic signatures that differed from those of all other species. But perhaps most important was learning to recognize the absence of sound, those moments when the normal night chorus suddenly stopped, indicating that something had disturbed the local animal community. The predators moving through an area often created zones of silence as smaller animals detected their presence and ceased their normal vocalizations. These sound shadows could provide early warning of approaching danger long before any visual contact occurred. Training to recognize these audio patterns involved thousands of hours of conscious listening practice. Students learned to identify sounds while awake, then gradually developed the ability to maintain this discrimination while drowsy, and finally while fully asleep. The most advanced practitioners could not only identify different sounds in sleep, but could assess their significance and respond appropriately without fully awakening. Vibration detection represented another crucial component of vigilant sleep. The ground transmitted information about movement and activity across considerable distances, especially during the quiet hours when other sensory inputs were reduced. Learning to interpret these earth-transmitted signals provided an additional early warning system that functioned even when audio cues were absent or unclear. Different types of movement created different vibration patterns in the ground. The rhythmic impact of walking or running animals created regular pulses that trained observers could distinguish from the irregular vibrations caused by wind-blown objects or geological settling. Large animals created stronger vibrations than small ones, but the patterns were also different. A large animal moving slowly might create less obvious ground signals than a smaller animal moving quickly. Snake movement produced particularly distinctive vibration signatures. The lateral undulation that propels most snake species forward created a pattern of ground pressure that was unlike any other type of animal locomotion. Experienced practitioners could detect snake movement through ground vibration, even when the animal was moving through vegetation or over surfaces that muffled audio cues. Learning to interpret ground vibrations required developing sensitivity in parts of the body that most modern humans never consciously use for information gathering. The hands, when placed flat against the ground, could detect subtle vibrations that indicated movement at surprising distances. The feet, when positioned correctly, could transmit vibration information through bones and tissues to awareness centers in the brain. But the most sophisticated vibration involved training the entire body to function as a sensing organ. Experienced practitioners sleeping directly on the ground could detect movement and activity through full body contact with the earth. Their sleeping positions were opted to maximize this ground contact while maintaining comfort and readiness for quick response if necessary. The integration of different sensory inputs during vigilant sleep created comprehensive awareness systems that functioned even during unconsciousness. Sound, vibration, air movement, temperature changes, and even subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure all contributed to a multi-dimensional picture of environmental conditions that could trigger appropriate responses without requiring full awakening. This sensory integration was so complete that experienced practitioners often couldn't explain exactly what had awakened them during potentially dangerous situations. They would simply find themselves suddenly alert and aware, with a clear sense that something was wrong. Even though they couldn't identify specific sensory inputs that had triggered their awakening, this intuitive response represented the culmination of years of training that had embedded threat recognition so deeply in unconscious processing that it functioned automatically. The social aspects of vigilant sleep were equally important. Groups sleeping together could create collective awareness systems where individual limitations were compensated by group coverage. Different people might have different sensory strengths, some more sensitive to sounds, others better at detecting vibrations, still others particularly attuned to changes in air movement or temperature. Sleep scheduling within groups was carefully managed to ensure that some level of consciousness was always maintained. While it might seem that having everyone asleep simultaneously would provide the deepest rest, this created vulnerability periods when threats could approach undetected. Instead, groups developed rotation systems where sleep depth was staggered, ensuring that someone was always in the lighter phases of sleep when awakening was easier and faster. Communication during vigilant sleep involved subtle signals that could convey information without fully awakening sleeping group members. A gentle touch could indicate, "Stay quiet but be ready." A specific type of movement could signal, "Danger approaching but not immediate." Different types of awakening touches conveyed different levels of urgency and appropriate responses. These communication systems had to be learned and practiced until they became automatic responses that functioned even during the confusion and disorientation that could accompany sudden awakening. The signals had to be clear enough to convey necessary information, but subtle enough to avoid alerting potential threats to the group's awareness of their presence. And the psychological aspects of vigilant sleep were perhaps the most challenging to master. Maintaining the relaxation necessary for restorative sleep while keeping alert systems active required a form of mental discipline that took years to develop. Too much alertness prevented genuine rest and led to exhaustion. Too much relaxation created vulnerability that could prove fatal. The balance point between adequate rest and necessary vigilance was different for each individual and had to be adjusted based on environmental conditions, threat levels, physical condition, and countless other factors. Learning to find and maintain this balance required understanding one's own physiology and psychology with extraordinary precision. Stress management was crucial for maintaining vigilant sleep over extended periods. The constant background awareness of potential danger created psychological pressure that could accumulate over time, leading to exhaustion, anxiety, and eventually the breakdown of the entire system. Successful practitioners learn techniques for managing this stress without compromising their alertness or their ability to rest. The long-term effects of vigilant sleep on human development were profound. Generations of people who practiced these techniques developed enhanced sensory capabilities, faster reflexes, and more efficient sleep patterns. Their nervous systems adapted to function optimally under conditions that would be overwhelming for modern humans accustomed to secure sleeping environments. These adaptations weren't just individual. They influenced entire populations and cultures. Communities that successfully mastered vigilant sleep techniques were able to inhabit and thrive in environments that would have been dangerous for groups for lacking these skills. This created evolutionary pressure that favored the development and refinement of these abilities over many generations. The knowledge and skills associated with vigilant sleep were among the most precious possessions of early human communities. They were taught carefully and practiced constantly and preserved through oral traditions that emphasized their crucial importance for survival. The loss of these abilities could mean the difference between a thriving community and one that couldn't survive in dangerous territory. Modern humans have largely lost the ability to practice genuine vigilant sleep. Our secure environments have made these skills unnecessary for survival, and our nervous systems have adapted accordingly. We sleep more deeply but less alertly, gaining rest but losing the extraordinary awareness capabilities that our ancestors possessed. But traces of these ancient abilities remain within us, embedded in our DNA and our neural architecture. Under extreme stress or in genuinely dangerous situations, some people can still access fragments of these capabilities. The capacity for vigilant sleep remains part of our evolutionary heritage, dormant but not entirely lost. As you listen to this story in whatever safe space surrounds you, as you perhaps drift toward your own secure sleep, remember that your ability to rest peacefully is built upon the vigilant sleep of countless ancestors who learned to find peace in the presence of danger, rest in the face of threat, and recovery while remaining forever ready to defend their lives and the lives of those they loved. Their vigilance echoes in your dreams, their alertness flows in your blood. Their hard-won ability to sleep safely in an unsafe world forms the foundation of the security that allows you to surrender completely to unconsciousness, trusting that you will wake safely in the morning light. In the vast theatre of night, where shadows danced with starlight and every sound carried the weight of potential danger, our ancestors discovered that survival was not a solitary endeavor. They learned to weave alliances with other species, creating partnerships that transformed the darkness from a realm of isolation into a network of mutual protection and shared vigilance. The most profound of these alliances was forged with creatures whose senses far exceeded human capabilities. Animals whose hearing could detect the whisper of approaching footsteps across great distances, whose noses could identify scents that were invisible to human perception, whose eyes could penetrate darkness that left humans blind and vulnerable. These partnerships weren't built on dominance or submission, but on the recognition that survival often depended on combining the unique strengths of different species into something greater than the sum of its parts. The relationship between early humans and dogs represents one of the most remarkable evolutionary partnerships in the history of life on Earth. This wasn't simply a matter of humans domesticating wolves, but something far more complex and mutually beneficial, a co-evolutionary process where both species adapted to work together so effectively that their bind capabilities opened up new possibilities for survival and expansion into environments that neither could have safely inhabited alone. The sensory capabilities that dogs brought to this partnership were nothing short of extraordinary. A dog's hearing operates in frequency ranges that extend far beyond human perception, allowing them to detect sounds that are completely inaudible to their human companions. Their ears can move independently to pinpoint the direction and distance of sounds with remarkable precision. In the context of snake detection, these abilities meant that dogs could often identify approaching serpents long before any human became aware of their presence. But perhaps even more important was the canine sense of smell, which operates at levels of sensitivity that challenge human comprehension. Dogs can detect odor molecules at concentrations measured in parts per trillion, allowing them to identify and track scents that are days old or present in quantities so small that sophisticated laboratory instruments might struggle to detect them. In snake country, this meant that a properly trained dog could identify areas where serpents had recently traveled, locate active dens, and detect the presence of snakes that were completely hidden from human senses. The training required to develop these natural abilities into reliable snake detection systems was both subtle and intensive. Dogs had to learn not just to detect snake scents, but to distinguish between different types of serpents, to assess the freshness and significance of scent trails, and to communicate their findings to human partners in ways that wouldn't alert potential threats or create unnecessary alarm. The communication systems that developed between humans and dogs for snake detection were sophisticated and multilayered. Dogs learned to use different body language signals to indicate different types and levels of snake-related information. A particular posture might indicate fresh snake scent in the immediate area. A different stance could signal the detection of older scent trails that indicated regular snake activity. Still other signals could convey information about the direction, distance, and apparent size of detected serpents. These communication systems had to function reliably in darkness and silence, situations where normal human-dog interaction would be impossible or dangerous. Dogs learned to convey critical information through subtle touches, gentle pressure, or minimal movements that could alert human partners without creating noise or visual signals that might compromise the group's safety. But the partnership extended far beyond simple detection and communication. Dogs that worked with humans in snake country had to learn complex behavioral protocols that balanced their natural instincts with the requirements of shared survival. Their natural tendency to investigate interesting scents had to be moderated when those scents might indicate dangerous serpents. Their instinct to bark at threats had to be refined into more subtle warning systems that wouldn't attract additional predators or alert snakes to human presence. The most skilled snake detection dogs developed what can only be described as wisdom, an intuitive understanding of snake behavior that allowed them to predict and interpret serpent activity with remarkable accuracy. These dogs could assess not just where snakes had been, but where they were likely to go, when they would be most active, and what environmental conditions would influence their movement patterns. This predictive capability was based on the dog's ability to read complex scent landscapes that told detailed stories about snake activity over time. A trained dog could examine an area and determine not just that snakes were present, but how many individuals were involved, how long they had been in the area, what they had been doing, and when they were likely to return. This information was invaluable for human groups trying to assess the safety of potential camping sites or travel routes. The integration of dogs into human survival systems required careful management of the dog's own safety and well-being. Dogs working in snake country faced the same risks as their human partners, but with different vulnerabilities and different protective strategies. Their faster movement and lower height could actually increase their risk of accidental encounters with ground-dwelling serpents, and their natural curiosity could lead them into dangerous situations that humans would avoid. And protecting canine partners required understanding their psychology and behavior as thoroughly as snake psychology had been mastered. Dogs had to be trained to recognize and avoid snake signs independently, not just to detect and report them to humans. They needed to understand when retreat was more appropriate than investigation, when silence was more important than alerting, when their human partners needed protection more than information. The feeding and care of dogs in resource-limited environments presented additional challenges. Dogs working in demanding conditions required adequate nutrition to maintain their sensory capabilities and physical performance. But food resources were often scarce and had to be shared among all group members. Learning to balance canine needs with human requirements was crucial for maintaining the partnership over extended periods. Healthcare for working dogs in preconditions required knowledge of canine physiology and medicine that paralleled human medical knowledge. Dogs could be injured by snakes, affected by plant toxins, or disabled by diseases that would compromise their ability to contribute to group survival. Maintaining canine health became another specialized knowledge area that required understanding anatomy, pharmacology, and treatment techniques specific to canine physiology. The breeding and selection of dogs for snake detection work created lineages of animals whose capabilities were specifically adapted for this type of partnership. Over generations, humans learned to identify and cultivate traits that enhance snake detection abilities while maintaining the temperament and trainability necessary for close cooperation. This wasn't random breeding, but careful genetic management aimed at preserving and enhancing specific capabilities. Different environments and different types of snake threats required dogs with different specialized abilities. Areas with primarily ground-dwelling snakes favored dogs with exceptional scent tracking abilities and low-profile movement patterns. Regions with arboreal serpents required dogs that could detect airborne scents and alert to threats from above. Each situation demanded different combinations of sensory capabilities, physical attributes, and behavioral characteristics. The relationship between humans and dogs in snake country wasn't one-directional. Dogs also benefited from human partnership in ways that enhanced their own survival capabilities. Human fire management created warmth and light that dogs could utilize. Human tool use and site preparation eliminated hazards that might injure or trap canine partners. Human knowledge of plant medicines could treat injuries or illnesses that dogs couldn't address independently. But perhaps most importantly, the partnership provided both species with the psychological benefits of shared vigilance and mutual support. The presence of trusted allies reduced the stress and fatigue associated with constant alertness, allowing both humans and dogs to rest more effectively while maintaining protective awareness. The emotional bond between partners created motivation for mutual protection that went beyond simple survival calculations. Fire represented another crucial ally in the darkness, but not in the simple, obvious ways that most people imagine. The relationship between humans and fire in snake country was complex and nuanced, requiring understanding of thermal dynamics, light management, fuel conservation, and smoke control that went far beyond simply lighting a flame and hoping for protection. The thermal effects of fire on snake behavior were based on the fundamental fact that serpents couldn't regulate their own body temperature internally. They were completely dependent on external heat sources to maintain the body temperatures necessary for normal physiological function. And this dependence created both opportunities and challenges for humans trying to use fire as a protective tool. A fire that was too large or too hot could create thermal barriers that snakes wouldn't cross, but it could also exhaust limited fuel supplies, create safety hazards for human occupants, or produce light and smoke that attracted other unwanted attention. A fire that was too small might provide insufficient protection while still consuming valuable resources and creating maintenance demands. The optimal fire management involved creating thermal environments that were uncomfortable for snakes but supportive for humans, warm enough to discourage serpent approach, but not so hot as to be wasteful or dangerous. This required understanding the burning characteristics of different fuel types, the relationship between fire size and heat distribution, and the effects of environmental conditions on fire behavior. Different types of wood and other burning materials produced different thermal signatures and different durations of heat output. Some materials burned hot and fast, creating intense but short-lived thermal barriers. Others burned slowly and steadily, providing consistent heat throughout the night, but requiring careful fuel management to maintain appropriate temperatures. The positioning of fires relative to sleeping areas, prevailing wind directions, and topographical features all influenced their effectiveness as thermal barriers. Fires had to be placed where their heat would create protective zones around sleeping humans without creating fire hazards or interfering with escape routes if other threats materialized. Wind management became a crucial component of effective fire use. Prevailing wind patterns could carry heat and smoke in directions that enhanced or reduced protective effects. Learning to predict and utilize wind patterns allowed skilled fire managers to create thermal barriers that were far more extensive than the fire itself, using air movement to distribute heat across larger areas. The light produced by fires offered both protection and potential vulnerability. Adequate lighting allowed human eyes to function more effectively during nighttime emergencies, but too much light could attract insects and small animals that might in turn attract hunting snakes. The optimal lighting provided enough illumination for emergency response without creating ecological disturbances that could increase rather than decrease snake activity in the area. Smoke production added another layer of complexity to fire management. Different burning materials produced smoke with different chemical compositions and different effects on animal behavior. Some types of smoke were actively repellent to snakes, while others had minimal deterrent effects. Still others could actually attract certain species under specific conditions. The most sophisticated fire managers learned to control smoke production to enhance protective effects while minimizing negative consequences. This involved understanding not just what materials to burn, but when to burn them, how to control airflow to influence smoke patterns, and how to time smoke production to coordinate with other protective measures. Fuel management in resource-limited environments required careful planning and conservation. Adequate fuel had to be collected during daylight hours when gathering was safer and more efficient. But fuel storage had to be managed to prevent attracting insects or small animals that might draw predators to the area. Fuel selection had to balance immediate burning requirements with longer-term supply needs. The integration of fire management with other protective strategies created comprehensive defense systems that were more effective than any single approach. Fire worked synergistically with site selection to enhance natural protective features. It complemented plant-based deterrents by activating and dispersing chemical compounds more effectively. It supported human vigilance by providing the lighting necessary for effective nighttime awareness. But perhaps most importantly, fire provided psychological benefits that were crucial for maintaining the mental discipline necessary for survival in dangerous environments. The presence of controlled fire created a sense of sanctuary and safety that allowed humans to rest more effectively while maintaining necessary alertness. The light and warmth provided comfort that reduced the stress and anxiety associated with sleeping in predator territory. The mastery of fire in snake country represented one of the most important technological advances in early human survival. It provided protection, comfort, and psychological support that made long-term habitation of dangerous environments possible. But this mastery required knowledge and skills that took generations to develop and refine, creating specialized expertise that was among the most valuable knowledge possessed by early human communities. As the night deepens around this story, as you rest in whatever protected space you have created, remember that the light and warmth that shelter you tonight echo the fires that your ancestors maintained through countless dark hours, the flames that stood guard while humans slept, the controlled energy that transformed darkness from enemy into ally, the dogs that shared their vigilance, the fires that shared their warmth, the intricate partnerships that transformed solitary vulnerability into collective strength. All of these alliances still echo in the safety that surrounds you, still speak in the peace that allows you to rest without fear, still burn in the sanctuary that makes sleep possible in a world that was once filled with serpents in the dark. In the deep mathematics of survival, no system was perfect. No amount of preparation, no depth of knowledge, no sophistication of defense could guarantee that the ancient negotiation between human and serpent would always proceed peacefully. There were nights when all the careful site selection, all the plant-based deterrents, all the vigilant sleep and canine allies proved insufficient. There were moments when prevention failed and our ancestors found themselves to face with the very danger they had spent their lives learning to avoid. These encounters, when they came, compressed the entirety of human survival knowledge into seconds of pure, distilled action. Everything learned about snake behavior, everything understood about serpent psychology, everything practiced in the realm of emergency response had to function flawlessly under conditions of extreme stress and mortal danger. The difference between life and death often came down to reflexes honed through years of training, decisions made in fractions of seconds, and the ability to maintain rational thought processes while adrenaline flooded the nervous system. The first and most crucial principle governing snake encounters was the recognition that panic was more dangerous than the serpent itself. The natural human response to sudden threat, the flood of adrenaline, the acceleration of heart rate, the tendency toward rapid, jerky movements, was precisely the opposite of what survival required when facing a creature whose strike response was triggered by sudden motion and stress indicators. Our ancestors had to train themselves to respond to snake encounters with what only be described as dynamic calm, a state of intense alertness and readiness that maintained the fluid, controlled movements necessary to avoid triggering defensive strikes. This wasn't passive freezing or paralysis, but active management of their own physiology and psychology under extreme pressure. The development of this dynamic calm required years of conditioning that began in childhood and continued throughout life. Children were exposed to controlled encounters with non-venomous snakes, learning to manage their fear responses and maintain appropriate behavior even when their nervous systems were flooded with alarm signals. These training encounters created neural pathways that would function automatically during genuine emergencies, allowing appropriate responses to occur even when conscious thought was overwhelmed by crisis. Adults practiced emergency scenarios repeatedly, training their bodies to respond correctly even when their minds were compromised by fear or confusion. They rehearsed the specific movements required for difference of encounters. What to do if a snake was discovered in the sleeping area, how to respond if a serpent was encountered during travel, what actions to take if someone else in the group was threatened or bitten. These practice sessions weren't casual exercises, but intensive training that embedded appropriate responses so deeply in muscle memory that they would function even under the most extreme stress. The movements had to be practiced until they became automatic, requiring no conscious thought or decision-making that might be compromised during actual encounters. The specific techniques for managing direct snake encounters were based on deep understanding of serpent behavior and psychology. Snakes didn't attack randomly or maliciously, but followed predictable response patterns based on their assessment of threat levels and escape opportunities. Learning to influence these assessments through appropriate human behavior could often transform potentially fatal encounters into situations where both species could withdraw safely. The concept of giving snakes face, saving exit opportunities was crucial for peaceful resolution of encounters. Cornered snakes were dangerous snakes, but serpents that could retreat safely were much more likely to choose withdrawal over confrontation. Human responses to snake encounters had to create pathways for serpent escape while providing human protection and safety. This often meant moving away from snakes rather than toward them, even when human instincts might suggest more aggressive responses. It meant creating space and reducing perceived threat levels rather than attempting to control or dominate the situation through force. It required understanding that the goal wasn't to defeat the snake, but to allow both species to disengage from a dangerous situation. The use of tools during snake encounters required specific training and technique development. Long sticks or staffs could provide the distance necessary to encourage snake movement without requiring close physical proximity that might trigger defensive strikes. But tool use wasn't simply a matter of poking or prodding. It required understanding snake psychology and applying pressure in ways that encouraged retreat rather than defensive responses. The optimal stick technique involved gentle, consistent pressure applied to the snake's body in directions that indicated preferred escape routes. Too much pressure or aggressive prodding could trigger strike responses even in snakes that were initially inclined to retreat. Too little pressure might be insufficient to encourage movement in situations where time was critical for human safety. The selection and preparation of appropriate tools was as important as the technique for using them. Sticks had to be long enough to provide safety distance, but not so long as to be unwieldy in emergency situations. They needed to be strong enough to apply necessary pressure without breaking under stress, but flexible enough to provide controlled, graduated force application. Different types of encounters require different tool approaches. A snake discovered in a sleeping area might require very gentle encouragement to move toward a predetermined exit route and hunger. A serpent encountered on a travel path might need more assertive guidance to clear the route quickly. A snake that appeared agitated or defensive might require minimal contact and maximum patience to avoid escalating the situation. The positioning and movement of humans during tool-assisted snake encounters was as important as the tool technique itself. Operators had to maintain positions that allowed quick retreat if the snake's behavior changed unexpectedly. They needed to avoid blocking the snake's preferred escape routes while ensuring their own safety and the safety of other group members who might be nearby. A group coordination during snake encounters was crucial for safety and effectiveness. Multiple people responding to a snake situation could create confusion and conflicting pressures that made peaceful resolution more difficult. Clear protocols had to be established for who would take primary responsibility for snake management while others maintained support roles or managed secondary safety concerns. Communication during active snake encounters had to be minimal and non-threatening. Loud voices or sudden sounds could startle snakes into defensive responses just as easily as sudden movements. The most effective communication used subtle gestures and minimal verbal cues that conveyed necessary information without creating additional stress for either humans or serpents. But even the most skilled snake encounter management couldn't prevent every bite. When defensive strikes did occur, the immediate response in the first minutes following envenomation often determined whether the victim would survive the encounter. Our ancestors developed sophisticated understanding of venom effects and immediate treatment protocols that could significantly improve survival chances even in situations where advanced medical care was impossible. The physiology of snake envenomation was complex and varied depending on the species involved, the amount of venom injected, the location of the bite, and the physical condition of the victim. Different types of venoms produced different effects on human physiology, requiring different treatment approaches and different assessments of survival probability. Hemotoxic venoms, common in many viper species including rattlesnakes, primarily attacked blood and tissue, causing hemorrhaging, tissue disruption, and circulatory system disruption. These venoms could cause dramatic swelling, severe pain, and progressive tissue death if not treated quickly and appropriately. But they typically took time to cause fatal effects, providing windows of opportunity for treatment intervention. Neurotoxic venoms, more common in other snake species but present in some rattlesnake subspecies, attack the nervous system directly, causing paralysis, respiratory depression, and potentially rapid death from suffocation. These venoms often produced less obvious initial symptoms but could cause fatal effects much more quickly than hemotoxic varieties. Understanding these differences was crucial for appropriate treatment response. Hemotoxic envenomation required immediate measures to limit venom spread and minimize tissue damage, while neurotoxic bites demanded more urgent attention to respiratory support and nervous system function. Misidentifying the type of envenomation could lead to inappropriate treatment that wasted precious time or even worsened the victim's condition. The immediate first aid for snake bite focused on limiting venom distribution while maintaining victim stability and preparing for more comprehensive treatment. This involved immobilizing the affected area to reduce lymphatic circulation that could spread venom throughout the body. but without creating tourniquet effects that might cause additional tissue damage. Traditional binding techniques used materials that provided consistent, moderate pressure without cutting off blood circulation entirely. The goal was slowing venom movement through the lymphatic system while maintaining adequate blood flow to prevent tissue death from oxygen deprivation. Getting this balance right required understanding both the physiology of envenomation and the effects of different binding pressures and materials. Positioning of bite victims was crucial for limiting venom effects and maintaining physiological stability. Keeping the bitten area below level when possible helped reduce venom circulation to vital organs. Maintaining specific body positions could optimize blood flow and respiratory function while minimizing the physical stress that could accelerate venom absorption. But the most sophisticated aspect of traditional snake bite treatment involved the use of plant-based medicines that could counteract or minimize venom effects when applied quickly and correctly. These weren't magical cures or superstitious remedies, but sophisticated pharmacological interventions based on generations of experimentation and observation of plant effects on envenomation symptoms. Certain plants contained compounds that could neutralize specific components of snake venoms when applied as poultices or consumed as preparations. Others had anti-inflammatory properties that could reduce swelling and tissue damage. Still others contained compounds that supported cardiovascular or respiratory function during the critical hours following envenomation. The preparation and application of these plant medicines required extensive botanical knowledge and sophisticated understanding of dosage, timing, and administration techniques. Different plants had to be processed in different ways to maximize their therapeutic effects. Some were most effective when used fresh, others when dried and powdered, still others when extracted through specific preparation methods. The timing of plant medicine administration was as critical as the selection of appropriate plants. Some treatments were most effective when applied immediately after the bite, while others worked best during later phases of envenomation. Understanding the progression of venom effects allowed experienced healers to time their interventions for maximum therapeutic benefit. Dosage calculation for plant medicines required understanding both the potency of the preparation and the severity of the envenomation. Too little medicine might provide insufficient therapeutic effect, while excessive doses could cause additional complications or toxic effects that worsened the victim's condition. Getting these calculations right required years of experience and careful observation of treatment outcomes. The administration of plant medicines often involved multiple routes: topical applications for local effects, oral preparations for systemic treatment, and sometimes more complex delivery methods that maximized absorption and distribution of therapeutic compounds. Understanding which administration routes were most effective for different types of envenomation was crucial for successful treatment. Pain management during snake bite treatment required balancing the need for victim comfort with the importance of maintaining clear assessment of symptoms and treatment effects. Some pain relief methods could mask important diagnostic information, while inadequate pain control create physiological stress that interfered with recovery. Psychological support for bite victims was as important as physical treatment. The knowledge that one had been bitten by a venomous snake created intense fear and anxiety that could actually worsen physiological effects and interfere with healing processes. Experienced healers learned to provide reassurance and emotional support that helped victims maintain the psychological stability necessary for optimal recovery. The long-term care of snake bite victims required understanding the extended effects of envenomation and the recovery processes that could take weeks or months to complete. Even successful immediate treatment didn't guarantee full recovery, and ongoing care was often necessary to address complications, manage pain, and support healing of damaged tissues. Community response to snake bite emergencies involved coordinated efforts that went far beyond immediate medical treatment. Group members had specific roles in gathering medicine plants, preparing treatments, maintaining victim care, and managing ongoing group survival needs while dealing with the medical emergency. The knowledge required for effective snakebite treatment was among the most precious and carefully guarded information in early human communities. It represented generations of accumulated experience, much of it gained through tragic trial and error. The healers who possessed this knowledge were valued beyond measure, their expertise often meaning the difference between life and death for bite victims. But even the most skilled treatment save every snake bite victim. Some envenomations were simply too severe, involved too much venom, or occurred in victims whose physical condition couldn't withstand the physiological stress of both the bite and the treatment. These losses were devastating for small communities where every individual was precious and where the knowledge that each person possessed was irreplaceable. The development of snake bite treatment protocols represented one of the most sophisticated medical achievements of early human societies. It required understanding anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and psychology at levels that rivaled modern medical knowledge in many respects. The integration of this knowledge into practical treatment systems that could function under primitive conditions was a remarkable achievement that saved countless lives over many generations. The preservation and transmission of this medical knowledge was accomplished through careful teaching traditions that emphasized practical experience and hands-on training. Healers learned through apprenticeships that lasted years, gradually building the expertise necessary to handle life and death medical emergencies under the most challenging conditions. These teaching traditions that ensured that crucial knowledge was preserved even when individual healers were lost to accidents, disease, or old age. Multiple people in each community maintained at least basic treatment knowledge, while specialized healers developed the advanced expertise necessary for the most severe cases. The psychological impact of living with constant awareness of snakebite risks created particular challenges for early human communities. The knowledge that a single mistake could result in painful death created stress and anxiety that had to be managed without compromising the alertness and caution necessary for survival. Successful communities developed cultural practices and belief systems that helped individuals cope with these psychological pressures while maintaining the vigilance necessary for safety. These might include rituals that provided emotional release, stories that transmitted safety knowledge while providing entertainment, or social practices that reinforced group solidarity and mutual support. The balance between appropriate caution and paralyzing fear was delicate and had to be maintained through cultural practices that promoted realistic risk assessment without creating panic or avoidance behaviors that would prevent groups from utilizing necessary resources or territories. As this chapter of the story draws toward its close, as the weight of ancient dangers settles into your awareness, remember that every peaceful night you experience is built upon the accumulated knowledge of ancestors who learned, through trial and error, through tragedy and triumph, how to survive when prevention failed and face encounters with death could not be avoided. Their courage in those moments of ultimate testing, their skill in transforming mortal danger into survivable crisis, their wisdom in developing treatments that could pull victims back from the edge of death. All of this flows forward through time to reach you here, in this moment, in this safe space where the ancient dance between human and serpent has been reduced to story, to memory, to the echoes of courage that still whisper in your DNA. In the deepest hours before dawn, when the world balanced on the edge between night and day, our ancestors understood something that we have largely forgotten. The serpent was not merely an adversary to be defeated or a danger to be avoided, but a teacher whose lessons were written in the language of survival itself. The rattlesnake, with its ancient wisdom and perfect adaptation to the rhythms of earth and season, offered instruction in ways of being that would shape human consciousness for millennia to come. This understanding emerged slowly, through countless generations of careful observation and lived experience. It grew from the recognition that the same creatures that posed mortal threats also possessed survival knowledge that humans desperately needed to learn. The serpent's mastery of stealth, its perfect attunement to environmental conditions, its economy of movement and energy, all of these represented forms of wisdom that could enhance human survival if properly understood and adapted. The serpent's relationship with Earth was the first and perhaps most profound teaching. Snakes lived in constant contact with the ground, reading its messages through their entire bodies, sensing vibrations and temperature changes that revealed hidden information about the world around them. They understood soil and stone in ways that upright humans could barely imagine, navigating through landscape features and underground spaces with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. This Earth connection offered lessons about environmental awareness that transformed how early humans perceived and interacted with their surroundings. Watching snakes navigate through terrain taught observers about hidden pathways, about the relationship between surface features and underground structures, about the subtle signs that indicated safe passage versus dangerous territory. The serpent's mastery of stillness provided another crucial teaching. Rattlesnakes could remain motionless for hours or even days, conserving energy while maintaining perfect readiness for action. This wasn't passive waiting but active, conscious immobility, a state of alert rest that allowed them to monitor their environment continuously while expending minimal energy. Early humans learned to adapt this serpentine stillness into their own survival practices. They discovered how to remain motionless when necessary, how to wait patiently for optimal conditions, how to conserve energy during periods when action would be wasteful or dangerous. This ability to be still while remaining alert became crucial for hunting, for avoiding predators, and for surviving in environments where movement could attract unwanted attention. The timing of serpent activity offered lessons in reading natural rhythms and optimizing human behavior to match environmental patterns. Snakes moved according to temperature cycles, weather patterns, and seasonal changes with a precision that reflected millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning. Their activity patterns were perfectly synchronized with the natural world in ways that maximized efficiency while minimizing exposure to danger. By observing and understanding these patterns, early humans learned to time their own activities for optimal safety and effectiveness. They discovered when to travel, when to rest, when to hunt, and when to remain hidden based on the same environmental cues that govern serpent behavior. This synchronization with natural rhythms became one of the most important survival skills in early human repertoires. The serpent's approach to conflict resolution provided teaching about when to fight and when to withdraw. Rattlesnakes possessed deadly weapons but used them only as last resorts, preferring to avoid confrontation through stealth, warning signals, or strategic retreat. Their warning rattle itself represented a sophisticated communication system that allowed potentially dangerous encounters to be resolved without violence. This serpentine wisdom about conflict avoidance influenced human approaches to territorial disputes, resource competition, and interpersonal tensions within groups. The lessons learned from observing snake behavior contributed to the development of human communication systems, negotiation strategies, and social protocols that allowed communities to resolve conflicts without resorting to violence. The energy efficiency that characterized all aspects of serpent behavior offered profound lessons about resource management and survival economics. Snakes never wasted motion, never expended energy unnecessarily, never pursued goals that weren't worth the costs involved. Every action was calculated, every movement purposeful, every decision based on careful assessment of energy expenditure versus potential benefits. Early humans learned to apply this serpentine efficiency to their own survival activities. They developed more economical movement patterns, more efficient hunting strategies, more sustainable approaches to resource utilization. The serpent's teaching about energy conservation became particularly important during periods of scarcity when wasteful behavior could mean the difference between survival and death. The serpent's sensory awareness provided lessons about perception and information gathering that expanded human consciousness in remarkable ways. Snakes processed environmental information through sensory systems that humans didn't possess. Infrared heat detection, chemical analysis through tongue flicking, vibration sensitivity through specialized organs. While humans couldn't duplicate these capabilities exactly, they could learn to pay attention to similar information sources and develop their own versions of enhanced environmental awareness. This serpentine approach to perception taught early humans to use all their senses more effectively, to notice subtle environmental changes that might indicate danger or opportunity, to develop intuitive awareness that functioned below the level of conscious thought. The integration of multiple sensory inputs into comprehensive environmental assessment became a crucial survival skill that allowed humans to navigate dangerous territories more safely and effectively. The serpent's seasonal adaptations offered lessons about preparation, patience, and long-term survival planning. And snakes understood instinctively how to prepare for changing conditions, when to become active, and when to enter dormancy, how to survive extended periods without food or water. Their ability to adjust their metabolism and behavior to match seasonal requirements represented a form of wisdom that humans needed to develop in their own ways. These lessons influenced human approaches to seasonal preparation, resource storage, and long-term planning. Early humans learned to think like serpents about future needs, about the importance of preparation during abundant times for survival during scarce periods, about the value of patience and strategic waiting when immediate action would be counterproductive. The serpent's territorial behavior provided teaching about space utilization and resource management that influenced human settlement patterns and land use strategies. Snakes maintained territories that were precisely sized to their needs, large enough to provide necessary resources, but small enough to be defended and monitored effectively. They understood the carrying capacity of their environment and adjusted their territorial claims accordingly. Human communities learned to apply similar principles to their own territorial organization. They developed settlement patterns that balanced resource access with defensive capabilities, that avoided overexploitation of environmental resources, that provided sustainable approaches to land use that could be maintained over multiple generations. The serpent's reproductive strategies offered lessons about timing, resource allocation, and investment in future generations. Snakes reproduced only when environmental conditions were optimal, when they had accumulated sufficient resources to support offspring successfully, when seasonal timing would give young snakes the best chances for survival. Their approach to reproduction was strategic rather than opportunistic, focused on quality rather than quantity. These reproductive lessons influenced human approaches to family planning, child rearing, and intergenerational resource transfer. Early human communities learned to time reproduction to match resource availability, to invest heavily in offspring education and preparation, to develop cultural systems that supported successful transition of knowledge and skills from one generation to the next. The serpent's response to injury and healing provided teaching about recovery, adaptation, and resilience that influenced human approaches to medicine and health maintenance. Snakes possessed remarkable abilities to heal from injuries, to adapt to physical limitations, to continue functioning effectively even after significant trauma. Their approach to healing emphasized rest, protection, and gradual return to normal activity patterns. Human healing practices incorporated many elements of serpentine recovery wisdom. The emphasis on rest during illness, the understanding of gradual rehabilitation after injury, the recognition that healing required time and couldn't be rushed. All of these reflected lessons learned from observing how snakes managed their own health and recovery processes. The integration of serpent teachings into human culture created philosophical and spiritual traditions that persisted for thousands of years. The serpent became a symbol of wisdom, transformation, and hidden knowledge in human mythologies around the world. These symbolic associations reflected the deep understanding that early humans had developed about the valuable lessons that could be learned from careful observation of serpent behavior. But perhaps the most profound serpent teaching was about the nature of coexistence itself. Snakes demonstrated that it was possible to be simultaneously powerful and peaceful, dangerous and non-aggressive, perfectly adapted for conflict yet preferring to avoid it. They showed that true strength often lay not in the ability to dominate others, but in the wisdom to know when force was necessary and when it was not. This teaching about coexistence became foundational to human social development. It influenced approaches to community organization, resource sharing, and conflict resolution that emphasized cooperation over competition, wisdom over strength, long-term sustainability over short-term advantage. The serpent's example provided a model for how different species and different human groups could share the same environment without constant warfare. The preservation of serpent teachings require living cultural practices that maintained connection with nat wisdom even as societies became more complex and separated from direct contact with wild environments. Storytelling traditions, ritual practices, and educational systems all serve to transmit serpent wisdom from one generation to the next. These cultural preservation systems ensured that crucial survival knowledge remained available even when environmental conditions changed or when human communities moved to new territories where different challenges required adaptation of traditional techniques. The serpent's teachings provided flexible principles that could be applied to new situations rather than rigid rules that only worked under specific conditions. The loss of direct contact with serpent teachers in modern human societies represents one of the most significant disconnections from ancestral wisdom. We have gained much through technological advancement and urban development, but we have also lost access to forms of natural knowledge that took millions of years to develop and thousands of human generations to understand and integrate. But the serpent's teachings aren't lost entirely. They remain embedded in human consciousness, encoded in our DNA, preserved in cultural traditions that maintain connection with natural wisdom. The capacity to learn from the natural world, to observe and integrate lessons from other species, to develop survival skills through patient attention to environmental teachers, all of these abilities remain part of human potential. Modern humans can still access serpent wisdom through careful observation of natural processes, through meditation practices that emphasize stillness and awareness, through lifestyle choices that prioritize efficiency and sustainability over consumption and waste. The serpent's teachings about timing, patience, energy conservation, and peaceful coexistence remain as relevant today as they were for our ancestors who learned them through direct experience in wild environments. As this teaching draws toward its close, as the serpent's ancient wisdom settles into your consciousness like morning dew on grass, remember that the capacity to learn from natural teachers flows in your blood. The ability to observe, to integrate, to adapt, and apply the lessons of the natural world remains part of your inheritance as a human being. The serpent's teaching continues in every moment when you choose patience over haste, efficiency over waste, awareness over ignorance, coexistence over domination. Their ancient wisdom speaks in every decision to observe before acting, to understand before judging, to seek harmony rather than conquest in your relationship with the world around you. Their lessons echo in the stillness that allows clarity to emerge, in the timing that knows when to act and when to wait, in the wisdom that recognizes strength and vulnerability as complementary rather than opposing forces. The serpent's teaching lives on in every human who learns to move through the world with awareness, purpose, and respect for the ancient wisdom that flows through all living things, deep within your cells, in the spiral architecture of DNA that carries the story of your species forward through time, lie the traces of every ancestor who ever learned to sleep safely beside serpents. Their knowledge hasn't disappeared. It has been encoded into the very structure of your being, written in a molecular language that speaks of ancient wisdom and hard-won survival skills. These echoes in the blood represent the living legacy of hundreds of thousands of years of coexistence with creatures that could kill with a thought. The neurological adaptations that allowed our ancestors to develop serpent sense remain embedded in modern human brain structure. The enhanced pattern recognition that could distinguish between snake movement and wind-blown grass, hunger. The heightened acoustic processing that could identify different types of footsteps during sleep, the visual systems that could detect subtle movements in peripheral vision. All of these capabilities persist in the human nervous system, dormant but not lost. Modern neuroscience has begun to understand how profoundly the presence of venomous snakes influenced human brain evolution. The primate visual system shows specific adaptations for detecting serpentine forms and movements that suggest millions of years of evolutionary pressure from snake encounters. Human eyes are remarkably good at spotting snake-like shapes and patterns, even when those shapes have nothing to do with actual serpents. This snake detection circuitry operates below the level of conscious awareness, processing visual information and triggering alertness responses before the conscious mind has time to analyze what has been seen. Watch someone's reaction when they glimpse a garden hose coiled on the ground or a rope lying in shadow. The instant startle response, the sharp intake of breath, the immediate focus of attention. These responses reflect ancient neural pathways that were shaped by countless generations of ancestors who survived because they could recognize serpent shapes in fractions of seconds. The auditory processing systems in human brains also show traces of serpent-related adaptations. We possess remarkable sensitivity to certain frequency ranges and sound patterns that correspond to snake movement through vegetation, snake breathing, and the distinctive rattle that gave rattlesnakes their name, of hunger. Even people who have never encountered a venomous snake often show strong reactions to recordings of rattlesnake sounds, suggesting that recognition of these audio signatures is built into our neural architecture. The stress response systems that allowed our ancestors to manage snake encounters with dynamic calm rather than panic remain functional in modern humans, though they're rarely activated by their original triggers. The ability to maintain rational thought and controlled movement under extreme stress, the capacity to process complex information quickly during crisis situations, the reflexes that can respond to threats faster than conscious thought. All of these represent evolutionary adaptations to life in environments where split-second decisions could mean the difference between survival and death. But perhaps the most remarkable echo of ancestral snake wisdom lies in human intuitive abilities that modern science is only beginning to understand. The capacity to sense danger without obvious sensory input, the ability to feel uncomfortable in certain environments without being able to explain why, the intuitive knowledge of when to be alert and when to relax. These represent sophisticated information processing systems that our ancestors developed through constant interaction with environmental threats. This intuitive awareness operates through integration of subtle sensory cues that remain below the threshold of conscious perception. Changes in air pressure, variations in background sound levels, alterations in the behavior of birds and insects, shifts in electromagnetic fields. All of these environmental variables carry information about potential dangers, and human nervous systems retain the ability to process this information unconsciously and generate appropriate alert responses. The social and cultural adaptations that allowed early human groups to survive in snake country also echo in modern human behavior patterns. The emphasis on careful observation and knowledge sharing that was crucial for survival in dangerous environments appears in modern human tendencies toward detailed environmental awareness and information exchange about potential hazards. Human teaching and learning systems show clear traces of the educational approaches that were necessary for transmitting snake survival knowledge. The emphasis on hands-on experience, the importance of learning from elders, the integration of practical skills with theoretical knowledge, the focus on life and death importance of certain information. All of these educational characteristics reflect adaptations to environments where learning failures could be fatal. The human capacity for long-term planning and seasonal preparation that was essential for surviving in snake country appears in modern human approaches to resource management, risk assessment, and security planning. Even in urban environments with minimal physical dangers, humans often display behavioral patterns that that reflect ancestral wisdom about preparation, vigilance, and community cooperation for mutual protection. The herbal knowledge that our ancestors used for snake bite treatment and snake deterrence has left traces in modern human pharmaceutical and medical systems. Many of the plant compounds that proved effective against snake venoms remain active ingredients in modern medicines. The systematic approach to testing and applying plant medicines that early healers developed became the foundation for all subsequent medical research and drug development. The understanding of plant chemistry that was necessary for creating effective snake deterrence appears in modern human abilities to identify beneficial and harmful plants, to understand ecological relationships, and develop sustainable approaches to environmental management. Even people with no formal botanical training often possess intuitive knowledge about plant properties and environmental relationships that reflects ancestral wisdom about plant-based survival technologies. The architectural principles that governed safe sleeping arrangements in snake country echo in modern human preferences for secure spaces, optimal lighting, and environmental control. The human need for protected sleeping environments, the importance of controlling access points, the emphasis on maintaining awareness of surroundings even during rest. All of these represent modern expressions of ancient survival wisdom. The fire management skills that our ancestors developed for protection against snakes appear in modern human relationships with controlled fire and environmental heating systems. The understanding of thermal dynamics, the ability to maintain consistent temperatures, the knowledge of fuel types and burning characteristics. These skills provided the foundation for all subsequent developments in metallurgy, cooking, and energy management. The partnership relationships that early humans developed with dogs for snake detection became the template for all subsequent human-animal cooperation. The communication systems, training methods, and mutual protection protocols that were developed for working with dogs in dangerous environments provided the foundation for agriculture, hunting partnerships, and companionship relationships that continue to enrich human life. The psychological adaptations that allowed our ancestors to live with constant awareness of mortal danger without becoming paralyzed by fear appear in modern human abilities to function effectively under stress, to assess and manage risks rationally, and to maintain optimism and productivity even in uncertain or threatening environments. These psychological resilience systems include the ability to compartmentalize threats so that awareness of danger doesn't prevent engagement with life, the capacity to find meaning and purpose even in dangerous circumstances, and the social support systems that allow individuals to share the psychological burden of living with risk and uncertainty. The cultural systems that preserved and transmitted snake survival knowledge across generations became the templates for all human knowledge preservation and educational systems. The emphasis on accurate information transmission, the importance of practical testing and verification, the integration of knowledge with cultural values and social structures. All of these characteristics of human culture reflect adaptations to environments where knowledge gaps could be fatal. But perhaps the most profound echo of ancestral snake wisdom lies in the human capacity for coexistence and conflict resolution. The understanding that our ancestors developed about living peacefully with dangerous creatures provided the foundation for all subsequent human approaches to managing relationships with potential adversaries. The recognition the most dangerous creatures weren't necessarily evil or malicious, that understanding and respect could often achieve better results than violence and domination, that coexistence was possible even with species whose interests might conflict with human needs. These insights became fundamental principles in human social development and continue to influence approaches to diplomacy, negotiation, and conflict resolution. The patience and long-term thinking that were necessary for successful coexistence with snakes appear in modern human capacities for delayed gratification, strategic planning, and sustainable resource management. The ability to sacrifice short-term advantage for long-term stability, to invest effort in preparation and prevention rather than relying on reactive responses, to maintain discipline and consistency over extended periods. All of these represent modern expressions of ancient survival wisdom. The ecological understanding that was necessary for sharing environments with snakes became the foundation for all subsequent human knowledge about environmental relationships and sustainable living. The recognition that all species were interconnected, that actions in one area could have consequences throughout an ecosystem, that long-term survival required maintaining the health and balance of entire environmental systems. These insights provided the conceptual framework for modern environmental science and conservation. The medical knowledge that early humans developed for treating snake bites became the foundation for all subsequent medical practice. The systematic observation of symptoms, the testing of treatments, the understanding of dosage and timing, the integration of physical and psychological healing approaches, all of these medical principles were first developed and refined through generations of experience with snake envenomation. The chemical knowledge that was necessary for creating plant-based snake deterrents provided the foundation for all subsequent human understanding of chemistry and pharmacology. The recognition that different substances could produce different effects, that combinations could create synergistic results, that timing and preparation methods could influence effectiveness. These insights became the basis for agriculture, cooking, medicine, and eventually all forms of chemical science. As you listen to this story, as these echoes of ancient wisdom resonate in your awareness, remember that you are not separate from this history, but part of its continuation. The knowledge that allowed your ancestors to sleep safely beside serpents flows in your blood, shapes your reflexes, influences your intuitions, and provides the foundation for your own capacity to navigate dangerous situations with wisdom and skill. The serpent sense that allowed them to detect danger before it became obvious remains available to you, encoded in neural pathways that can still function when circumstances require their activation. The dynamic calm that allowed them to respond to threats without panic remains part of your inheritance, waiting to be accessed when crisis demands rational action under extreme pressure. The ecological understanding that allowed them to live sustainably in environments shared with dangerous creatures remains relevant to modern challenges of coexistence, resource management, and environmental protection. Their wisdom about patience, preparation, and peaceful conflict resolution continues to offer guidance for navigating complex social and environmental challenges. Their knowledge was never abstract or theoretical, but always practical and immediately applicable to the business of staying alive in a dangerous world. It was tested daily against reality, refined through constant application, validated by survival itself. This knowledge represents one of humanity's most precious inheritances, a library of wisdom written in the language of lived experience and preserved in the deepest structures of human consciousness. The echoes in your blood are not just memories but living potentials, capabilities that can still be awakened and applied when circumstances demand them. The ancient conversation between human and serpent continues in every moment when you choose awareness over ignorance, understanding over fear, coexistence over domination. Their wisdom speaks in every decision to observe before acting, to prepare for challenges before they arise, to seek harmony rather than conflict in your relationships with the forces that shape your world. The serpent's teaching lives on in every human who learns to move through life with the grace, awareness, and deadly efficiency that our ancestors learned from their dangerous teachers in the wild places of the world. As consciousness settles into the deepest channels of rest, as the boundary between waking and sleeping dissolves into something softer than memory, we enter the realm where our ancestors' greatest wisdom was preserved. In the long dream that connects all human sleep across the vast expanses of time. Here, in the liminal space between night and day, between danger and safety, between the world that was and the world that is, the ancient knowledge continues to flow like an underground river, carrying the essence of what it meant to rest peacefully in the presence of serpents. The long dream is not simply the accumulation of individual nights of sleep, but something larger and more mysterious. a collective unconscious where the survival wisdom of countless generations mingles and merges, where the hard-won knowledge of our ancestors becomes available to their descendants through pathways that science has only begun to understand. In this deep place of shared human experience, the skills and insights that once meant the difference between life and death continue to resonate, to teach, to offer guidance to those who know how to listen. When our ancestors finally learned to sleep safely beside rattlesnakes, they achieved something that was both practical and profound. They had mastered not just the techniques of survival, but something deeper, the art of finding peace in the presence of danger, rest in the face of threat, a sanctuary in situations where sanctuary should have been impossible. This mastery was not just about defeating snakes or avoiding them, but about transforming their relationship with fear itself. This transformation began with acceptance, the recognition that danger was not an aberration to be eliminated, but a permanent feature of existence to be understood and accommodated. Our ancestors learned that perfect safety was an illusion, that security came not from the absence of threat, but from the development of wisdom, skill, and community systems that could function effectively even when threats were present. This acceptance allowed them to develop what we might call a different relationship with vulnerability. Instead of seeing their need for sleep as a weakness that exposed them to danger, they learned to see it as an opportunity to practice trust. Trust in their knowledge, trust in their preparations, trust in their community, and ultimately, trust in the larger patterns of existence that governed both human and serpent behavior. The development of this trust was not naive or careless, but sophisticated and earned. It was based on deep understanding of natural systems, extensive preparation and risk mitigation, comprehensive knowledge of snake behavior and habitat preferences, and proven techniques for creating protective environments. Their trust was not blind faith, but confidence based on competence and verified through generations of successful application. This earned trust allowed them to enter sleep with a quality of peace that we can barely imagine. They could surrender to unconsciousness completely while maintaining the alert awareness that would awaken them instantly if conditions changed. They could rest deeply while remaining connected to the environmental information that might indicate approaching danger. They achieved a state of vigilant peace that provided both the restoration that sleep must offer and the protection that survival demanded. The quality of this sleep was different from our modern experience of rest. It was more connected to natural rhythms, more integrated with environmental awareness, more embedded in community relationships. It was sleep that belonged to the wild world, that participated in the great cycles of darkness and light, that remained part of the larger conversation between all living things. This wood sleep carried knowledge that domesticated sleep has lost. It understood the relationship between rest and alertness, between vulnerability and strength, between individual needs and community safety. It knew how to find restoration without losing connection to the sources of life and the requirements of survival. The dreams that came during this wild sleep were different too, more vivid, more connected to waking reality, more likely to carry information that was useful for survival. Our ancestors often reported dreams that warned of approaching dangers, that revealed the location of resources, that provided guidance for difficult decisions. These dreams were not separate from their waking lives, but integrated with their survival activities, part of the comprehensive awareness system that kept them alive in dangerous environments. Modern sleep research has begun to understand some of the mechanisms that might have made such dreams possible. The brain states that occur during REM sleep involve the same neural networks that process sensory information during waking hours, but with different patterns of activation and integration. In environments where survival depended on continuous environmental monitoring, these neural networks might have remained partially active even during sleep, creating dreams that incorporated real sensory information about current conditions. The social aspects of wild sleep created additional layers of meaning and safety. Sleeping in groups meant that individual vulnerability was shared and distributed, that the awareness of any one person could protect the entire community. That the responsibility of survival was collective rather than individual. This shared vigilance created bonds of trust and interdependence that went far beyond simple practical cooperation. The rituals and practices that surrounded sleep in Snake Country became sacred activities that reinforced community bonds while serving practical survival functions. The careful inspection of sleeping sites, the gathering and preparation of deterrent plants, the maintenance of protective fires, the positioning of guards and sentries, all of these activities created shared experiences that built community cohesion while enhancing group safety. These bedtime rituals served psychological as well as practical functions. They provided ways for community members to demonstrate care for each other's welfare, to share the responsibility for group protection, to maintain the social bonds that made cooperative survival possible. The activities of preparing for safe sleep became opportunities for teaching, learning, and reinforcing the cultural knowledge that kept everyone alive. The stories that were told during these bedtime preparations carried multiple layers of meaning. On the surface, they were entertainment that helped pass the time during the lengthy process of site preparation and safety arrangements. But they were also educational tools that transmitted survival knowledge, social guidelines that reinforced community values, and psychological supports that helped individuals manage the stress and anxiety of sleeping in dangerous environments. These bedtime stories often featured encounters between humans and snakes, but they were not simple adventure tales or cautionary warnings. They were sophisticated narratives that explored the complex relationships between humans and serpents, the ethical questions raised by sharing territory with dangerous creatures, mathematics of hunger, the philosophical implications of coexistence with beings that could kill without malice or evil intent. The heroes and heroines of these stories were not warriors who defeated serpents through strength or cunning, but wise individuals who learned to understand snake behavior so completely that conflict became unnecessary. The highest achievement in these narratives was not victory over snakes, but the development of wisdom that made peaceful coexistence possible. These stories shaped the dreams and aspirations of young people, providing models for how to think about their relationship with dangerous aspects of the natural world. They taught that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to function wisely in the presence of legitimate threats. They emphasized that intelligence and understanding were more valuable survival tools than strength or aggression. The transmission of these stories generations created cultural continuity that preserved survival knowledge even when environmental conditions changed or when communities moved to new territories. The stories carried the essential principles of snake coexistence in forms that could be adapted to new circumstances, new snake species, and new environmental challenges. But the most profound aspect of the long dream was its connection to something larger than individual or even community survival. Our ancestors began to understand that their relationship with serpents was part of a vast web of relationships that connected all living things. That the wisdom they developed through coexistence with dangerous creatures had implications that extended far beyond their immediate survival needs. This larger understanding recognized that humans and snakes were both part of the same ecological systems, both subject to the same natural laws, are both dependent on the same environmental resources for survival. The techniques that humans developed for living safely with serpents were applications of broader principles about sustainable relationships with the natural world. The patience that was required for successful snake coexistence taught lessons about working with natural cycles rather than against them, about the importance of long-term thinking over short-term advantage, about the value of preparation and prevention over reactive responses to crises. These lessons proved applicable to countless other aspects of survival and community life. The observational skills that were necessary for understanding snake behavior became the foundation for all subsequent human scientific knowledge. The careful attention to detail, the systematic testing of hypotheses through practical application, the integration of multiple sources of information into comprehensive understanding. All of these intellectual approaches were first developed and refined through generations of snake-related survival research. The ecological awareness that was necessary for sharing environments with snakes provided the conceptual framework for understanding environmental relationships more generally. The recognition that actions in one area could have consequences throughout an ecosystem, that the health of individual species was connected to the health of entire environmental systems, that long-term sustainability required maintaining balance rather than maximizing short-term extraction. These insights became fundamental principles of human environmental knowledge. The development of non-violent conflict resolution techniques that proved effective with snakes provided models for managing disputes and tensions within human communities. The emphasis on understanding rather than domination, on creating conditions that allowed all parties to meet their essential needs, on using communication and behavioral modification rather than force to resolve conflicts. These approaches became foundational elements of human social organization. The medical knowledge that was developed for treating snakes provided the conceptual foundation for all subsequent human approaches to healing and healthcare. The systematic observation of symptoms, the testing and refinement of treatments, the understanding of dosage and timing, the integration of physical and psychological healing approaches. All of these medical principles were first developed through generations of experience with snake envenomation. The chemical knowledge that was necessary for creating plant-based snake deterrents became the foundation for human understanding of chemistry and pharmacology more generally. The recognition that different substances could produce different effects, that combinations could create synergistic results, that preparation methods and timing could influence effectiveness. These insights provided the basis for agriculture, cooking, medicine, and eventually all forms of applied chemistry. But perhaps the most important legacy of the long dream was the demonstration that seemingly impossible challenges could be overcome through patience, observation, understanding, and gradual accumulation of knowledge. Our ancestors faced a survival problem that appeared to have no solution: how to sleep safely in the presence of creatures that could kill them instantly and silently. Through generations of careful work, they not only solved this problem, but transformed it into an opportunity for developing wisdom and capabilities that enhanced their lives in countless ways. This demonstration of human potential became part of the cultural inheritance that our ancestors passed down to their descendants. The knowledge that seemingly insurmountable challenges could be overcome through persistence and wisdom, that dangerous situations could be transformed through understanding and skill, that cooperation and coexistence were often more effective than conflict and domination. These insights became foundational elements of human culture and consciousness. The long dream carries this knowledge forward through time, preserving it in forms that remain accessible to those who know how to listen. In the deep places of human consciousness, in the spaces between sleeping and waking, in the quiet moments when modern defenses are lowered and ancient wisdom can emerge, the knowledge of our ancestors continues to flow. This knowledge speaks in intuitive hunches about when situations feel dangerous, in the ability to remain calm under pressure, in the capacity to observe carefully and learn from what is observed. It appears in the human tendency to seek understanding rather than dominance when facing unknown challenges, in the preference for prevention over reaction when dealing with potential threats, in the recognition that the most elegant solutions often involve working with natural forces rather than against them. The long dream reminds us that we are not separate from the natural world, but part of it, not above the other creatures we share the planet with, but connected to them through relationships that can be sources of wisdom as well as danger. It carries the memory of a time when humans learned their most important lessons not from books or teachers, but from direct engagement with the living world, when survival depended on understanding and respecting the capabilities and needs of other species. In the deepest hours of night, when the boundary between past and present becomes permeable, when the accumulated wisdom of countless generations flows like an underground river through human consciousness, the long dream continues to offer its teachings. It reminds us that peace is possible even in the presence of danger, that wisdom can transform threat into opportunity, that the greatest victories often come not through conquest, but through understanding. As you drift deeper into this story, as your own consciousness settles into the rhythms of rest and restoration, allow yourself to connect with this ancient stream of knowledge. Feel the presence of ancestors who learned to sleep peacefully beside serpents, who transformed their fear into wisdom, who found ways to coexist with creatures that could kill them with a thought. Their knowledge flows in your blood, their wisdom echoes in your dreams. Their hard-won understanding of what it means to find peace in the presence of danger remains available to you whenever you need to access the deepest sources of human strength and resilience. The long dream continues, carrying their gifts forward through time, offering their teachings to any who are ready to receive them. In the quiet spaces of your own rest, in the peaceful moments when modern anxieties fade and ancient wisdom can emerge, listen for the whisper of their voices, the echo of their footsteps, the gentle rhythm of their breathing as they slept safely through countless nights in the presence of serpents, are protected by knowledge that transformed danger into sanctuary, threat into teaching, fear into the deepest and most abiding forms of peace. And so we come to the end of this ancient story, though endings, like the serpents themselves, are never quite what they appear to be. In the soft grey light that precedes true dawn, in the liminal space where night surrenders to day, the knowledge of our ancestors continues its eternal vigil, watching over sleeping humans as it has for countless millennia, whispering its wisdom to those who remember how to listen. The rattlesnakes still coil in hidden places, their ancient patience unchanged by the passage of human history. They still follow the same seasonal rhythms, still respond to the same temperature cues, still practice the same arts of stealth and survival that their ancestors perfected millions of years before humans walked the earth. They remain what they have always been, perfect teachers for those wise enough to learn from them. The knowledge that our ancestors accumulated through generations of careful observation and lived experience has not disappeared. It has been transformed, encoded, preserved in forms that transcend individual memory and cultural tradition. It flows in the structure of human DNA, echoes in the architecture of our nervous systems, whispers in the spaces between consciousness and dream. Modern humans, sleeping safely in climate-controlled rooms behind locked doors, carry within their cells the accumulated wisdom of ancestors who learned to rest peacefully beside creatures that could kill with a single strike. The vigilant awareness that once meant the difference between life and death remains embedded in human consciousness, dormant but not lost, ready to emerge when circumstances demand it. The serpent's teaching continues in every moment when humans choose understanding over fear, patience over haste, coexistence over domination. Their ancient wisdom speaks in every decision to observe before acting, to prepare for challenges before they arise, to seek harmony rather than conflict in our relationships with the forces that shape our world. The long dream carries their knowledge forward through time, preserving it in the deepest places of human consciousness where it remains available to those who know how to access it. In the quiet hours before dawn, in the peaceful moments when modern defenses are lowered and ancient wisdom can emerge, their voices still whisper the secrets of how to find sanctuary in the presence of danger. This knowledge was never simply about snakes. It was about developing the wisdom to live peacefully with the dangerous aspects of existence, about transforming threat into opportunity through understanding and skill, about finding the courage to rest deeply even when perfect safety was impossible. The principles that our ancestors learned through their relationship with serpents. Careful observation, patient preparation, ecological awareness, community cooperation, non-violent conflict resolution remain as relevant today as they were 10,000 years ago. The challenges we face may be different, but the wisdom required to meet them draws from the same deep sources of human intelligence and resilience. As you emerge from this story, as consciousness returns to your current circumstances and immediate concerns, carry with you the knowledge that you are part of this continuing tradition. The wisdom of your ancestors flows in your awareness, their courage strengthens your resolve, their understanding provides guidance for navigating the challenges of your own life. The serpent's vigil continues, patient and eternal, watching over human sleep, as it has since the first of our kind learned to close their eyes in trust rather than terror. Their teaching echoes in every peaceful night. Their wisdom flows in every moment of rest that comes not from the absence of danger, but from the presence of understanding. Sleep well, knowing that you carry within you the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who learn to find peace in the presence of serpents. Rest deeply, trusting in the knowledge that flows in your blood and whispers in your dreams. The ancient vigil continues, watching over your sleep as it has watched over human rest since the beginning of our time on this earth. And in the morning, when you wake refreshed and restored, remember that your peaceful sleep was made possible by ancestors who faced their deepest fears and transformed them into wisdom, who found ways to coexist with creatures that could kill them, who learned that the greatest victories often come not through conquest, but through understanding. Their story continues in your story. Their wisdom lives on in your choices. Their courage echoes in your capacity to find peace even when the world seems dangerous, to rest deeply even when perfect security is impossible, to trust in the knowledge that flows like an underground river through human consciousness, carrying the accumulated wisdom of our species forward through time. The eternal vigil continues. The serpent's teaching endures. The long dream flows on, carrying the gifts of our ancestors to their descendants, preserving the knowledge of how to sleep safely in a dangerous world, how to find sanctuary in the presence of threat, how to transform fear into wisdom and danger into opportunity for growth. This is Sleepless Homo, where the stories of deep time become lullabies for the modern mind, where the wisdom of our ancestors becomes medicine for contemporary souls. Hunger, where the long dream of human survival continues its patient work of teaching, healing, and preserving the knowledge that keeps us connected to our deepest sources of strength and understanding. Stay curious, stay calm, and remember always that you are part of a story that began long before you were born and will continue long after you are gone. The eternal human story of learning to find peace in the presence of danger, rest in the face of threat, and wisdom in the company of our most dangerous teachers. Until we meet again in the quiet spaces where ancient wisdom still whispers its secrets, where the serpent's teaching continues its patient work, where the long dream carries us all safely through the darkness toward whatever dawn awaits.